7 o'clock on today's programme, the last major political hurdle cleared for the PM's Rwanda bill. Can anything stop flights taking off in a few weeks' time?
Well, we'll ask the Home Office Minister central to last night's debate, that's Michael Tomlinson, and the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Plus, to mark St George's Day, we'll ask, are you unpatriotic if you don't fly the flag?
It's Tuesday, the 23rd of April.
The contents have it.
Controversial Rwanda bill set to become law after months of delays. As we watch a boat launch off France this morning, we ask asylum seekers here how they feel.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum, don't come into UK.
Attacked with rubber bullets, we speak to the migrants in northern France who accuse police of drastic tactics to stop them getting to the Channel. Multi-million-pound funding boost announced for Ukraine as the PM heads to Poland. We'll bring you all the highlights from inside court from the first day of Donald Trump's trial.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it.
View from the Met Police boss on the police officer involved in this incident that's caused an anti-Semitism row.
Gelato al limone, gelato al limone, gelato al limone.
Why Milan wants to ban takeaway ice cream after a certain hour to protect residents. Good morning. After months of twists and turns, the government's controversial Rwanda bill is on the home straight, poised to become law after the House of Lords dropped the last of its amendments in a late-night parliamentary battle. It clears the way for the government to begin deporting migrants to Rwanda, which the Prime Minister says will begin in 10 to 12 weeks' time. John Craig has our first report.
The question is that motion A be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content. The contents have it.
The moment peers in the House of Lords ended their long fight against the government's Safety of Rwanda bill. It came at the end of a day when Rishi Sunak demanded that MPs and peers sat through the night if necessary. An hour earlier, the Commons voted by a majority of 75 to throw out the last remaining Lords' amendment to the bill on a monitoring process on whether Rwanda is a safe country.
The Act will prevent people abusing the law by using false human rights claims to block removals.
The key moment during the latest round of ping-pong between Lords and Commons came when the government made a major concession on demands for an exemption from deportation to Rwanda for Afghan interpreters fleeing the Taliban. That led to a former Labour Defence Secretary withdrawing his amendment.
They left these people behind. They messed up any subsequent evacuation plan. This is a third opportunity competently to do the right thing.
So in the end, there was no need for sleeping bags or camp beds, and dire threats of votes at 3 a.m. never materialised. The long parliamentary battle over the Safety of Rwanda bill finally came to an end just after midnight. But the lone Tory rebel on the final day of debates on the bill now says he wants the policy to work.
It's vital that we move from process here in Parliament to making sure that this happens.
For the PM, now the battle in Parliament is over, he'll no longer be able to blame his political opponents if the policy doesn't take off. John Craig, Sky News.
Just a second, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons will be with us from Dunkirk. But first, our correspondent Alice Porter is live off the coast of Dover. Alice, good morning. What's it like where you are?
Well, the conditions, Kay, at the moment, it's calm, it's bright, and they really are ideal conditions for somebody making that dangerous journey from France over to the UK. And of course, it's important to stress this is the busiest shipping route in the world, and it makes it incredibly dangerous for anyone making the journey over. Now, so far, we've had these political wranglings that have been going on for 2 years in Westminster, and clearly, so far, that hasn't deterred people from making those dangerous journeys by boat, because the number of people arriving to the UK by boat so far this year is up 24% from the same period last year. So far, more than 6,000 small boats have made their way over to the UK. And of course, that is costing the UK a significant sums. Over on the White Cliffs of Dover, which I can just see from here, they've got special cameras that are along the cliffs that are trying to detect any small vessels making their way over. And of course, Border Force are patrolling the area regularly and using drones to pick up the boats. But the question is, will this new legislation deter people from making that dangerous journey?
And thanks, Adam. It doesn't seem like it, does it, given what you've witnessed this morning live in Dunkirk?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a pretty much perfect day here if you wanted to get across the channel. The moon was very bright, the sea is calm, and what we saw about half an hour ago was a packed dinghy leaving from just around the headland here in Dunkirk and heading out towards Britain. Now, actually, in a rather unusual twist, that dinghy has now gone back in towards the land. I assume that there was a fault on board it. It's very nearly gone out of sight, but actually it's now stopped, I think, trying to decide whether to have another go at getting back towards the shores of Britain or whether to give up and come inland. They know that if they come inland that the police are going to seize that vessel and almost certainly slice it up, rendering it unusable. So I think an indication that there is no sign of any deterrent. I have to say, I just spoke to a French police officer who said to me that the Rwanda bill, in his opinion, will change nothing.
OK, for now, thank you. Thanks a lot. Becky Johnson has been speaking to asylum seekers in Derby, some who have already been warned they could be sent to Rwanda.
You are all welcome here in Derby, and it is important that your voices can be heard by the Home Office in London.
The welcome offered by this charity in Derby, in contrast with the government's intention to send people here to Rwanda. Several of these asylum seekers have been told they're being considered for removal. Hamza, who's from Iran, received this letter from the Home Office saying it may ask Rwanda whether it would admit him. I'm very stressed, he tells me. I don't know what to do. All I can think about is this letter and Rwanda. And for everyone still waiting to hear the outcome of their asylum claim, the concern is no news means bad news.
Rwanda is not a safe place.
Does it make you regret coming to the UK?
Yeah, if before I came here, you say that, they sent me in Rwanda. I never come here.
Fatima says she doesn't regret leaving Afghanistan.
I fled my country in order to be safe, yeah? Otherwise, I'm gonna killed by Taliban.
How do you feel that you could now get sent to Rwanda?
It is not fair, especially for the one who came from Afghanistan.
Outside the meeting, Masood, who's from Iran, reveals an email confirming he too is being considered for Rwanda. Would you have come to the UK if you'd have known you could end up in Rwanda?
Never. Never.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum don't come into UK.
His words could be seized on by the government as evidence the Rwanda plan will work as a deterrent. But the Prime Minister also needs it to work as a vote winner. And in Derby city centre, we found feelings are mixed. You support people being sent to Rwanda?
If not there, then somewhere.
I'm pretty sure it's going to cost a lot of money, so when that could be put into other places in the country.
People who are small-minded will just go, yeah, great, it gets rid of people, or things like that.
Whether it now happens this summer matters to the success of the policy and the people waiting to see if they'll be on a plane. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Derby.
And at 7:20, joined by Michael Tomlinson, the Minister of State for Illegal Migration. And at 8:15, the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper will be with us here in the studio. Meantime, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will visit Warsaw today, where he's set to announce a record package of military funding for Ukraine, including the UK's largest ever delivery of vital equipment like vehicles and missiles. The Prime Minister is expected to announce £500 million of additional funding for a range of military support, including drones supplied by the UK. It means that overall the UK will be spending £3 billion in military aid for Ukraine this financial year to help them defend against Russia's invasion. The Ministry of Defence will send more than 400 vehicles, the largest ever single package of equipment from the UK. It'll also send more than 1,600 strike and air defence missiles, as well as additional Storm Shadow long-range precision-guided missiles. Deborah's here. That's a lot.
It's a lot, and I think a lot of it's coming from the British Army's own cupboard, which is looking increasingly bare. And so, of course, it underlines how the urgent moment is now in Ukraine. And the UK, as James Heappey, the recently exited Armed Forces Minister, said to me in an interview a couple of weeks ago, we need to really go further and dig deep in all the support we can give to Ukraine, because they are really struggling now with Russian forces piling pressure on them in key places like the city of Chasiv Yar in the east, which, if it falls, opens up potentially the whole of the Donbass to Russian artillery, which would be a significant and very bad move. But also, it really does raise questions for the Prime Minister as to what he is going to do about Britain's own defences. We revealed last month that the UK has no plan for national defence. It has no national defence plan, even though there's a war in Europe. And now we're giving even more, rightly so, equipment, military equipment to the Ukrainians. But what is the Prime Minister going to do about replenishing stocks at home? And I'm sure he'll be asked that by his allies on this trip.
OK, for now, Debs, thanks very much indeed. What's happening as far as the rest of the news is concerned?
Good morning. Yes, we'll start with the number of alcohol-related deaths in the UK. It's reached a record high, shooting up rapidly at the start of the pandemic. New figures show that in 2022, more than 10,000 people died as a direct consequence of drinking, which is around a third higher compared with 2019. They were highest in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the northeast of England. More smokers are trying to curb the habit as a result of the cost of living crisis. A pack of cigarettes is expected to tip over £16 from October 2026. That's after tobacco duty was increased in the spring budget. Researchers from the University College of London found more than 5,500 people surveyed. Each of them had made an attempt to quit over the past 12 months. The Metropolitan Police has agreed that an independent force will review the handling of new evidence relating to the murder of Stephen Lawrence 30 years on from his killing. Stephen Lawrence was stabbed to death in a racist attack by a gang in South London. Only 2 of his killers have ever been brought to justice. The original investigation was criticised in the landmark Macpherson report back in 1999, which found the Met to be institutionally racist. To the United States now, Donald Trump facing the second day of his criminal trial today in one of the most high-profile cases in American history. The court's already heard from prosecutors accusing him of waging an illegal scheme to corrupt election results. James Matthews has the details.
It is the rare sight, now routine, of a former president on a daily court run. Donald Trump snaked through the streets of Manhattan in the cavalcade that carves a new chapter in US legal and political history. This was a day for opening statements from prosecution and defense, and from the defendant by the door.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning, and it's very unfair.
Donald Trump, as a criminal defendant, is a spectacle in itself.
The courtroom is incredibly dingy.
Author Michael Wolff was inside court.
It's very rare for someone like Donald Trump or for any celebrity to be in front of the public for so many hours. I mean, he is naked before us.
The prosecution case is that porn star Stormy Daniels was paid off to keep an affair with Trump quiet just before the 2016 election. Trump's lawyer made the payment, and when he was reimbursed, it was put through the books as something else. The prosecution says that was the falsification of business records that amounted to election interference. They told the jury this case is about criminal conspiracy. It was election fraud, pure and simple. Trump's defense attorney told them there's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. Opening statements saw Trump's defence unveiled as attack on the former lawyer Michael Cohen, who paid the porn star. They said he was obsessed with getting Trump. The first witness has now taken the stand, David Pecker, who used to publish the National Enquirer magazine. He helped to orchestrate a so-called catch and kill scheme to catch negative stories about Donald Trump and kill them before they reach the public arena. For Donald Trump, it is the evidence of friends and foes, and his future depends on it.
Well, that was James. Let's get more from him now.
We heard from both sides in their opening statements. The prosecution said this was a criminal conspiracy, election fraud, pure and simple. As for the defence, they said there's nothing wrong in trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. The defence attacked Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former personal lawyer, saying that he was obsessed with getting Trump. Cohen is the lawyer who paid money to the porn star, who claimed she had an affair with Donald Trump just before the 2016 election. The prosecution say that when he was reimbursed, it was put through the books as something other than a payment to a porn star. That was falsification of business records and election interference. We heard from our first witness, David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. He was involved in a so-called catch and kill scheme to hide, to bury negative stories about Donald Trump. What he has to say about that and who was involved will be key.
It seems our problem with potholes continues to deepen. That's as new data showing pothole-related breakdowns in the UK were up 9% in the past year alone. In the year to end of March, the RAC says it was called out to over 27,000 breakdowns caused by crumbling roads. That's up more than 3,000 on the previous year.
Returning to our top story this morning, after the government's Rwanda bill finally passed through Parliament last night, many continue to risk everything to cross the Channel, no matter how tough the journey to get to Britain. Sky News has spoken to people in search of a better life, but are they worried about what the government's Rwanda legislation could mean for them? Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
In these rural, sleepy villages of northern France, there are some familiar visitors. A caravan of migrants traipsing back from the beach. Smugglers provided a dinghy to cross the Channel and try to reach the UK. But French police put a stop to it, and this group was keen to show us how. They're exhausted and say the police attacked them.
The plastic pistol for shooting.
They tell us the French officers used rubber bullets to stop them getting to the water. They've come from far. Many had tried to settle elsewhere in Europe and told us they were threatened with deportation. Germany, which receives the most asylum seekers each year, is now speeding up that process. In the first 2 months of this year, its deportations were up by a third compared to the same period in 2023.
Everyone want to go to UK.
Why?
Because we have a problem. European country deport. Yeah, deport. In here, deport.
So you have to leave France?
Yes, France, Deutschland, but deport.
They see the likelihood of being deported from the UK as slim. The government has admitted a lengthy backlog on processing claims. And their solution to that is the Rwanda bill, legislation that will now allow people like this to be sent to Africa. But there's little sign here that it would be a deterrent. You think that Britain would not send you to Rwanda? That wouldn't happen?
No, Rwanda, no. Rwanda, Africa.
No,
Rwanda, Africa, no good. No safe.
You think life would be a lot better in the UK?
Yes.
They've walked miles, and soon enough, it's time to stop. They'll try again tonight, and at some point they will succeed. But here's their main obstacle. French police looking for the groups and the smugglers intent on getting them to the UK. British taxes pay for their police overtime and the expensive resources they need to stop dinghies from crossing the Channel. They have visibly toughened up their presence and their tactics. The smugglers will always find a way. Over the past few days, many people have made that journey, rescued from flimsy vessels and then brought to Britain. Rishi Sunak is adamant that sending migrants to Rwanda will become a potent deterrent. But here, many still believe that crossing the Channel is simply the key to a better life. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Dunkirk.
Ashna's here. Are we looking at what happened at that pro-Palestine march on Saturday in a different light, given what we've heard from Sir Mark Rowley today?
Yesterday, when we heard from the former Met Superintendent, Dal Babu, about seeing the full footage, after a lot of people who still work within the Met, but those who have left, once they'd seen it in context, they did feel differently about the events that unfolded on Saturday. Mark Rowley today, the Met Commissioner, very much coming out fighting in support of that police sergeant who was part and centre of that incident on Saturday. He did say, the Commissioner, that the turn of phrase that was used was clumsy and offensive, but has praised the professionalism, he says, of that sergeant. There were so-called crisis meetings held yesterday between the Commissioner and a number of political figures, including the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London, who have...
And the Policing Minister.
Right, and they have all sort of stood by him and agreed that the language and that was used was wrong, but they do stand by him and do have his support. This is a little bit of what Dal Babu told us yesterday about what it appeared to be a situation of the officer trying to ensure the march proceeded safely, but that also Mr. Falter was safe too.
I think the police dealt with it, tried to be as sensitive as possible. I think the police officer was offering to take Mr. Falter and his group to a place where they could cross more appropriately.
Well, Gideon Falter, campaigner against anti-Semitism, responded to those comments yesterday. He said that he did feel it was impossible for that officer to be placed in that position by the senior leadership, and he has once again affirmed that Mark Rowley should be sacked. Here's what he said in response.
After he says to me, "You are quite openly Jewish," after he says that will antagonise the crowds, after he says you'll be arrested if you stay here, and people are whipping out their smartphones and your camera crew and various other people are on him, he realises how badly he's screwed up.
Next big question is what happens next Saturday?
That is the question, particularly as we know that Mr. Falter is planning to walk near the planned pro-Palestinian march on Saturday. The Met have always been quite forceful and robust when it comes to the policing of events like this. So I think it'll be more of the same from them in that they have managed to police these things largely very well in the past. But Mark Rowley standing by what happened, the wider actions, the intent of the officer were professional and in the best tradition of British police trying to prevent disorder.
OK, for now, thanks very much. Thanks a lot. We'll see what happens on Saturday. Quick look at the weather for you here on Sky News. In the next couple of days, look a little brighter than the start of the week, but temperatures will be on the low side of average for the time of year, and it will feel cooler still in the northerly flow. Still to come, there was an unexpected guest on the tarmac at an airbase in Florida. What do you think it might have been? Yep, an alligator pictured under the wheels of a tanker plane. Two officers from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission were seen wrangling with the reptile until they were able to subdue and remove him. And a large coyote has been spotted in New York's Central Park. This video shows the moment the unlikely park goers stop to pass by in their tracks, as you would expect. While coyotes are a rare sight in the Big Apple, they have been spotted in the park since the 1930s. Still to come on the breakfast programme for you. St George's Day, to celebrate or to castigate how England's patron saint has become a lightning rod for controversy.
Target towns like Grimsby and Cleethorpes will help decide who wins the next election. But here, like in so many towns, some people are indifferent about polling day. Join me, Sophie Ridge, for a Politics Hub special, when we meet those who say they don't want to vote. What will change their minds? And yours.
The sewage problem is huge, but it's also a massive problem with plastic pollution as well. But yeah, the sewage problem in the UK is pretty horrific. I think the plastic problem is definitely getting worse. We're definitely noticing it more and more. I often hit plastic in the water when I'm windsurfing. You see quite a lot of it, from crisp packets to plastic bags to big plastic containers. And that's global. That's not just a UK problem, it's everywhere. When we're racing, you can hit stuff in the water and you stop instantly. So you go from 35 miles an hour to 0, and that causes injuries. It ends your race. You can lose world titles over it. I've had friends that have lost world titles off the back of hitting plastic in the water, and that's just not fair. In terms of the sewage pollution, I've had to go abroad for training. It's almost impossible. If you think about every day that it's windy in the UK, almost, it's raining, and that's when they can discharge sewage in the storm overflows. So for it to be safe to go in the water, it's so rare that we can have good enough conditions and for it to be safe. In the UK, we have a good monitoring system, so you can at least tell through the Surfers Against Sewage app whether it's possible to go in the water or safe to go in the water, but invariably, it's not ideal. The situation here is really, really terrible. I'm actually having a year off from competition.
Okay.
But I am coming back next year in a new discipline, and so I'm training for that. Can you tell me? Yeah, so I've been a racer for my whole life, and now I'm moving into waves. So racing is about going as fast as possible, 8 people on the race course at the same time, no rules, and the first person over the finish line wins. And now I'm moving more into wave sailing, where it's all about using the waves to surf and then using them as a ramp to jump off.
Talk about the government's Rwanda bill. Joining us, Michael Tomlinson, the Home Office Minister. It's always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
When will the flights go?
10 to 12 weeks. You'll have seen the Prime Minister's press conference yesterday, where he very clearly set out the timetable and what's going to happen next. We're both impatient. I'm impatient. I've explained this before. We want flights to get off the ground as soon as possible. But there are certain steps that need to happen between now and then, and that's why the 10 to 12 weeks timetable has been so clearly set out by the Prime Minister.
What steps?
The steps are we need to ensure that the caseworkers are properly trained. That's starting now. That's starting this week as soon as the legislation has passed. We need to make sure that the treaty is ratified, that the bill receives royal assent and becomes an act of parliament. Then it's inevitable, I'm afraid, that there are going to be challenges. It's inevitable that people are going to try and throw everything in this at this to try and stop this plan from working. I mean, frankly, we saw last night from the Labour Party and from the Labour Lords, they seem more determined to stop the flights. We're determined to stop the boats. There will be challenges, but we will meet them, we will overcome them, and that's why it's going to take 10 to 12 weeks.
Which airport?
I'm not going to go into operational details. I can completely understand the question, the reason you ask that, and also the interest in that. But as I've said, there are those who are determined to stop this. And if I go into details such as that with you, then that will help those who are wanting to stop this. I want this to succeed. I want this to succeed. I want this to work. And there are those who don't want it to work. The reason I want it to work is because I want to stop the boats crossing the channel. I want to stop the evil criminal gangs. I want to stop the drownings, the fatalities that we've seen in the Channel every single month. 9 fatalities this year, 1 a young girl as young as 7. We must stop the boats, and I'm determined to do everything to ensure that we get the flights off the ground and do just that. And so if I go into details like that with you, those who want to stop it will be emboldened, will be enabled, and will try even harder to stop it. I'm just not going to
I mean, security around our airports is second to none, so how? I don't get it.
Well, there are those who want to stop this. I mean, that is a fact, and you know that, I know that, and your viewers know that as well. And the more details that I go into, the more that gives them the chance, the opportunity to stop those flights. And that's just not something that I'm willing to do.
So you're not going to tell me which airline either? Is it a commercial airline?
I'm not going to go into those details. You're absolutely right, for the reasons that I've already told you.
OK, but what you're doing so far has not stopped the boats, is it? They're up 24% this year.
That is right. You're right about that. Last year, they were down by 36%. This year, they are up. We've seen an increase in vulnerable Vietnamese migrants being smuggled across by those evil criminal gangs, just as you saw when there was a spike with Albania. The Prime Minister clamped down on this. And I signed an agreement with my Vietnamese counterpart last week. We're looking at exactly why there's been a tenfold increase. We're determined to clamp down on that. But that's why we need this policy to get in place, respectfully. That's why I was standing at the bar of the House of Lords last night at just after midnight. That's why I and my colleagues are determined to get this bill through. Because having got the bill through, we can get the flights off the ground, we can get the deterrent effect in place, and that's the final piece of the jigsaw to make sure that we can stop the boats.
There's the rub, the evil criminal gangs. That's what Labour says that they would target.
Well, frankly, what you've heard from Labour is they have said they would do what we're doing already, except they have said they'll scrap this scheme. Even when it's up and running, even when it's working as a deterrent. You've had the clearest of answers that ask the toughest illegal migration legislation that's ever been passed. They would scrap this even when it's working.
Because they'd focus on the gangs instead.
No, they're saying they would do exactly what we're doing already. It's quite interesting. You'll have seen that from the debate last night, the exchange between the two front benches. They're proposing, they have no plan apart from what we're already doing and apart from to scrap exactly this measure, which is the deterrent that's in place. They voted 134 times against our tougher illegal migration legislation. No, because
that's what they say.
Well, because they don't want this scheme to work. They don't want this deterrent to be in place. They don't believe in it. We do. We think that it's necessary. And frankly, I think that the Labour Party are more interested in stopping the planes rather than stopping the boats.
What about the houses that were supposed to be in Kigali ready for people who were being deported from the UK? They've been sold.
Well, I'm afraid there's been a little bit of misreporting about that. And
OK, so clarify it for me, please.
Well, thank you, and that's what I'm doing. There are houses that are there. It's an uncapped scheme. Rwanda's a very welcoming country, and it is there. It is ready to take. It's already housing 135,000 migrants there already. It's an incredibly welcoming country.
Some of those houses have been sold off. Is that not right?
There are houses that are there. Already.
Have some of them been sold off?
There are houses that are there, that are in place,
have
ready
some been sold
for...
off or not?
Of course houses have been sold, that is right, but it's mixed housing. No, it's mixed housing. These aren't ghettos where people are going to be put in Rwanda. It's mixed housing, part of the policy for Rwanda to welcome refugees. I think what we haven't heard enough
but the Boise Riverside estate was set up for these people that were coming from the UK. It's been delayed so much that as a result, some of those houses have now been sold off to local people. Well, is that right or not?
That is right. Okay. It was always inevitably going to be that way because it was for mixed housing. It wasn't just for refugee housing, and that's a really important point.
Talk to me about what... let me just ask one final question on that, if I may, about the plans for Afghans who served alongside UK forces. Yeah. What's going to happen to them?
Well, we've said we're not going to let them down, and that's absolutely right.
What does that mean?
So what that means is that there's a UK Special Forces review that's happening right now, that each applicant is going to be looked at in detail, and those that are eligible are not going to be deported to Rwanda. That was a really important part of the debate yesterday that we saw, where the...
So none of them are going to be sent to Rwanda in the interim?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And none of those who are eligible once the review has been conducted. And that review will take its time. But you're absolutely right. Once that review has happened, those who have served alongside, we will do the right thing, as I've said at the dispatch box, and those who have served alongside us will not be sent to Rwanda.
I'm reading in the paper this morning that Sir Mark Rowley has praised the officer who clashed with Gideon Falter during the pro-Palestinian march at the weekend. Is that something that you find acceptable?
Well, I think the police have had a really tough job when they have been policing the marches that have been going on. I think what we saw was unacceptable. And I think
what was unacceptable?
I think the way that the individual Gideon was dealt with was unacceptable.
In what way?
The language that was used, Kay, and I think anyone who's seen the clip would probably
agree. Have you seen the full 13 minutes?
I have.
And?
I have. And I think that does put it into context, and that's why I started my remarks by saying that the police do a really difficult job. But I don't think anyone of faith, whether you're Jewish, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Christian, should be prevented from going about your day-to-day lives and your daily lives.
Do you think that's what was happening?
Well, that was in part what was happening. And I think...
What do you think would have happened? Let me just ask you this, Minister, if I may. What would have happened, do you think, if he had been allowed to walk straight through the middle of that march? And there's also video available seeing him walking 180 degrees straight into the march.
Well, as I say...
What do you think would have happened?
The answer is I don't know. But I think the long clip that you referred to does put it into context. And that's why I started my remarks by saying that the police do a very difficult job. But my very strong belief is if you are somebody who is Jewish, if you're somebody who is a Christian, if you're somebody who is a Muslim, you should be allowed to go about your day-to-day life.
Walking through the middle of a march?
Well, the police...
Would you do that?
The police officer apologised. Well, I have done, because I've had to do that. But a police officer...
With an opposing view?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me an example.
An example was on a Saturday in London when there was a similar march, and I had to get to Downing Street. That's an example. I had to get down Whitehall, and it wasn't easy at all. But the police officer has rightly apologised for that. But I think the full context, as rightly you put before your viewers, it does show the difficult job that our police do when they're policing their streets, and I think we should thank the police for what they're doing.
What should happen if Gideon Slater decides again next week, Gideon Folter, forgive me, decides again next week that on Saturday, as he's said, he's going to take another stroll through central London in the proximity of a pro-Palestinian march? He should be perfectly entitled to do that.
I think people should be entitled to walk around London and to get on with their day-to-day lives. I think the police are entitled to get on and to do their job to the best of their abilities. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is we're seeing protesters, protesters and the police trying to do a difficult job.
So you wouldn't want the police to stop him if he does that again on Saturday?
I would want people to be able to walk about
I'm
London.
asking you specifics. If he does it again on Saturday, which he says he's going to do, you don't want to see, as a Home Office Minister, you don't want to see the police stop him?
I don't want to see people stopped from going about their day-to-day lives in London. No, I don't.
OK. Quick thought on the football before you go?
Thank you so much for asking. Any football that you had in mind?
Where were you last
Wimbledon Town. I was on Saturday at Wimbledon Town. There were lots of goals. It was 1-1. But we're going to win the league on Tuesday, tonight. We might win the league. Since you asked me that question, they've been going from strength to strength. I've been trying to claim some credit, but I'm told by the general manager. I've been told by the general manager it's nothing to do with me, and it's all to do with the team, and that it's all down to them. But good luck to them tonight.
Who's the star striker?
I couldn't tell you that. Jez played well. Jez played well on Saturday, I'm told. I think. Jez.
Did you see you were a star on Have I Got News for You?
It was shown to me, Kay, thank you. People did giggle and laugh and say, but there it is.
Who's laughing now if they win the league, eh?
Well, if they win the league tonight, we'll all be laughing. And I hope you watch tonight.
Absolutely. Are you going?
Are you promised to watch?
Yes, are you promising to go?
No, I'm not, because I'm going to be in London, sadly. But if you can get me a slip from the Whip's office, I might.
OK, we'll have a word. It's good to see you, as always. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Let me just bring you these latest pictures that we can see from the coast of France. This was a small boat that set off this morning in front of one of our cameras, but we believe that it was actually turned back. We're not sure why at this stage, but Adam Parsons, who was witnessing this, said that the boat went back, at least for now. Mari, apart from being a football fan, what else did you do?
OK. I thought it was an interesting interview. I mean, he was mirroring a lot of what the PM said yesterday in the press conference speech, that he didn't want to give more details, kind of operational details about the policy, about the scheme, because the government feels that essentially giving those kinds of details allows those who are opposed to the policy to kind of maybe have the edge over them, as it were. And the more details they are able to access, the more likely they are to try and, thwart the efforts of the government. So that was interesting. What was also interesting was he admitted that boat crossings had gone up 24% this year when you pointed that out to him. And then when you said about the accommodation, and you mentioned the fact that actually some of the accommodation's been sold off, and then he said to you, well, no, there's been some misreporting, and you said, OK, well, let's clarify this. And then he continued to say, yes, it's absolutely correct. It has been sold off. So I'm still trying to figure out what he was talking about when he was saying there was misreporting, because he didn't actually point out anything that was inaccurate. So he acknowledged that that was the case and that is happening. And interestingly, when you asked him about Mark Rowley, the Met Police Commissioner, he started by saying the police have a very difficult job, and we know that the Prime Minister said he still has confidence in the Met Police Commissioner. And really, I think the difficulty, I think no matter which side you're on, you can see that the police have a really, really difficult job when it comes to trying to balance two sides when it comes to these kinds of protests.
But he did say that Gideon Falter should be allowed to cross the road if he's
and
there again
he said he'd done something similar himself.
Yeah.
And that he'd walked through a pro-Palestinian protest, a similar protest on Whitehall, which was trying to get to Downing Street. So you could see his sympathies were still lying with Gideon, the Jewish man
who said those pro-Palestinian marches had opposing views to him, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that was really
more to come. Quick look at the top stories.
More to come. Yes, I was just looking to see who the star strikers for Wimborne Town were, but I'll come back to you on more details.
OK, we're not doing the top stories.
We're not doing the top stories. We'll have those later on.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I'll come back to those in due
OK,
course.
have I been talking too much and so you can't do them now?
Effectively, yes.
OK. Okay. On this day each year since the 9th century, England has marked the feast day of the nation's patron saint, St George. But in that time, loyalty to the flag of St George has become associated with patriotism and also, some say, racism. To debate the topics, we are going to ask for both sides to see what they have to think about that. Let's bring in Iman Aiton and Raf Haidel Manku. Hopefully that was close enough. It's good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Air of controversy. I don't know who wants to start. Let's see who wants to start about St George's Day.
Well, you know what, Rafe is excellent manners. So I'm actually going to let you start, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, my gosh, what a civil way to start this,
this
discussion.
I'm following you.
Happy St George's Day, first and foremost. A great chant. Remember Cecil Rhodes' great quotation. He says, "Remember, sir, you are an Englishman and have therefore won first prize in the lottery of life." Unfortunately, today it doesn't seem very much like that's very much in evidence, because whilst everybody else in our society today is encouraged to celebrate their identity and their heritage and their culture, it seems that there's one exception, and that's England and the English. You know, when the Scots and the Welsh wave their flags proudly, it's called progressive nationalism. Increasingly, when the English do that, they say that it's racist. And I think it's a huge shame because, you know, England really invented the modern world, from the English language to the Industrial Revolution, the mother of parliaments.
I can feel the hairs on the back of her neck prickling.
Well, it shouldn't be, because these are all just factual. This is all factual. The spread of capitalism around the world, you know, even the way we dress, the suit is the universal form of dress. That's an English invention too. So there's so much to celebrate about England. But, you know, and strong, self-confident nations that are the most successful don't constantly navel-gaze and self-flagellate about perceived wrongs from the past. They celebrate their achievements. But England uniquely isn't allowed to do so.
OK, well, I appreciate the earlier points that you made. I disagree with your latter points. So I actually find it quite ironic that we're talking about St George's Day and we're actually referring to a Turkish man. So let's just be clear. St George's Day, the gentleman that we know, a part of St George's Day, he was actually born in Turkey. Hold on. Apparently, he never actually came to England. And secondly, he is also the patron saint of many different countries, including Bulgaria, Ethiopia, Greece, Serbia, and Palestine. Isn't that ironic? And Portugal. Thank you. Right. So I actually find it quite interesting. Right. So I think that you're right. It's an aside, but I just thought it'd be handy to know. In terms of why this is an issue for many people that look like me, this nationalism and patriotism is basically centred around including you and excludes me. And I think what happens in these types of conversations is we conflate...
Why does it include me?
OK, so let me explain. So we tend to conflate patriotism with nationalism. So patriotism is very much centred around supporting and devotion of your country, right? So I'm patriotic. I care about my country. I was born here. I come and talk about issues that pertain to England. I am patriotic. Support and devotion. Nationalism, on the other hand, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it is support of the interests of your country to the detriment and exclusion of other nations and their interests. So by definition, Rafe, nationalism is exclusionary. It excludes people, and this is what St George's flag...
let him come in and reply.
Yeah, well, firstly,
with.
St George wasn't Turkish. He was a Greek Cappadocian descent Roman Praetorian Guard soldier.
He was born in Cappadocia, which is Turkey, modern-day Turkey.
But he was Greek, he wasn't Turkish.
But he was still born in Turkey,
he was not Turkish. That's a modern construct.
Right,
you can't use modern...
Guys, come on, that's not what we're debating today.
But, you know, why call it nationalism? We're talking about patriotism here. It's interesting...
They're interchangeable.
It's interesting that the Scottish Nationalist Party and the Welsh Nationalists have managed to make their form of patriotism progressive nationalism, and for some reason the same isn't allowed here. When we know, no, thank you. When we know full well that England is one of the world's 3 least racist nations, behind only Brazil and Sweden. And yet, of course, the narrative that we get is that this is a land of systemic racism and colonialism and slavery and all the rest of it. The evidence simply doesn't stack up.
No, that's
there is no country which has got...
a lie.
No, I'm sorry, this is not a lie at all. We have the most diverse parliament in Europe. We have the most diverse government. We have much better race relations than anywhere else.
Let's get back to the subject.
The subject
You're going off on many tangents.
No, do you mind? Would you please let me finish my point?
Go ahead,
The point is that we have a harmonious society here in England. So nationalism and patriotism here isn't exclusive. My point here, which you've conveniently forgotten, is that this is an inclusive society. And I think it's about time that we celebrate it.
That's what patriotism
Winston
is
Churchill
about.
once said, "There is a forgotten, nay, almost forbidden word, which means more to me than any
May I
other."
interject now?
That word is England, and we need to reclaim for England all of those great things that we've woven up into the British national fabric.
Thank you, Kay. I think we should bring it back to the flag. So just to kind of bring a bit more context into this conversation. For me personally, when we think about the Union Jack, firstly, the Union Jack was... Union flag. Sorry, Union Jack.
We're discussing England, not the Union Jack.
Hold on, we're talking about 2 different flags and we're talking about
No,
St George's Day.
We're talking
about St George's Day.
Yeah, Union flag is that. When it's on the end of at the back of a boat, that's a Union Jack.
Sorry. So, Union flag. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me, Kay. When we think about the Union flag, I think that is more centred around civic nationalism, which is defined as liberal, kind of conservative views, equality, right? So we ended the slave trade. These are the things that a lot of people can kind of get behind, especially because that flag was represented in the 50 colonies that Britain colonised in Africa. So we can get behind that flag. But what happens with the St George's flag, again, it actually has been, as you know, it's been circulated throughout many conversations over the last week or 2 or a few days, is that the St George's flag is very much, or has been, hijacked by far right, and therefore, hold on a second, and therefore is connected and leads to xenophobia and racism.
I'd love to see where this mythical far right
hold on a
is.
second,
I can't find them anywhere.
Therein lies the distinction between the 2 flags. And so if we want to talk about inclusivity, I would say we go for the Union flag, because that one is far more inclusive, far more people can see themselves in it, that representation that we keep hearing, as opposed to the St George's flag, which has been hijacked. And it's a Turkish man. He would be an immigrant in these days.
In 1966, there was a sea of Union flags in the World Cup. Now at every England match, there's a sea of St George's flags.
So you're saying you praised
the Royal Navy flag at the back there, the white ensign, is the flag of England. You go to any country church in this country, in the Cotswolds, in the Lake District, you'll see the flag of St George flying serenely above parish churches. The flag has been absolutely reclaimed, and there's no huge far-right element in this country. This is a great another myth of the left. And the right haven't hijacked... One second, please. The right haven't hijacked nationalism. The left have vacated the field. You know, in the old days, people like Tony Benn, Clement Attlee were hugely proud of the left's contributions to England and were proud of being English. People like Billy Bragg on the left.
So are Labour.
Great patriot. No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
One second, let me finish. What's happened now is the left hate the nation state,
Sweeping
nationalism and borders.
Sweeping statements.
Because they are internationalists. They're not nationalists, whereas the right have always celebrated that. So it's up to the left to reclaim their proud history. You know, the Levellers, the Diggers, the Chartists. There's so much that the left can celebrate if they wanted to.
We're almost
Thank you. Let's just say about reclaim, I will just bring it back to the N-word. We have all seen many, many black people from here across the world, in the US, try to reclaim the N-word, and it doesn't negate the fact that the N-word will forever be associated as a racial slur and derogatory towards black people. So you try as you might sir. Try as you might in regards to reclaiming the St George's flag, it doesn't negate the fact that other people will feel
England
and
gave
will
you
always
a great
associate it with
lifestyle.
racism
You
and
are benefiting
xenophobia.
from life in England, all right? England has given you everything, and it's about time you showed some
and I do. That's
for
called
what England has done.
That is called patriotism, sir.
Good to
not
see you both.
nationalism.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, as always, on the programme. Certainly livening up the first hour on the show. Still to come on The Breakfast Show, older drivers are being forced off the road by rising car insurance premiums. Speaking to a motoring lawyer about the impact this is having on Britain's over 65s on this St George's Day.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, you know, his memories is all gone.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
You got your political agenda.
No, it's
God,
honestly...
God love you.
And beyond the United States, I report from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
Allahu Akbar.
I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here, they know the truth of ISIS.
Hello again, everybody. Let's talk about elderly motorists facing being forced off the road by soaring car insurance bills, an ageing population being blamed for the spiralling premiums. But some drivers are being denied insurance altogether, despite being one of the safest demographics on the road. What on earth is going on? Let's bring in Nick Freeman, motoring lawyer. Hi, Nick. Why are the premiums so expensive for over 65s?
Well, I think they're being unfairly targeted. I mean, insurance premiums have gone up massively because of electric cars. They're more expensive to make, they're more expensive to run, they're more likely to be stolen. There's problems with the batteries. So we've got that problem, we've got the theft problem. So insurance premiums across the board are going up. But older drivers who have increased massively, there's something like 6.19 million drivers over 70 now, compared with about 4 million 10 years ago. Their premiums have gone up massively, 43% in the last 12 months. So they've gone up disproportionately compared with other people. And as you rightly say, that they're among the safest people on the road. The justification appears to be that when they get to their 80s, they're more frail and more likely to be injured. But obviously, you've got at least 15, 16, 17 years in between them when they're safe they're not likely to be so injured, and yet they seem to be shouldering a massive rise. So it's unfair. It's something the government are aware of. There's been a record number of complaints before the Ombudsman. So it is something that's going to be dealt with. But at the moment, what's happening is many older drivers now can't even get insurance. Some of them are simply being declined insurance, or the premiums are so high that they are being forced off the road. And of course, this has a huge effect upon them. Many of them have lost partners. There's loneliness. They can't get about. They need connection to get about their day-to-day life. It's very important as one gets older. They're being deprived of all these things, which causes, of course, mental health difficulties. And a lot of older people have hospital appointments, doctor's appointments, those sort of things that they're unable to keep. So it's causing massive difficulties for them, and it's something that needs to be urgently dealt with. And as I say, they're just being unfairly targeted at the moment, and it's wrong. And
why
it's
is it, though? Do we know why it is, Nick?
I think they're just an easy target, aren't they? To me, I can't see any logical reason other than they're easy. They're not going to fight. They're not going to kick up a mess, a stinking argument, and they are, because there's a record number of complaints. But I think the insurance company sees them as an easy target, and they're not working. So maybe the insurance company thinks not only is it easy prey, but most of them aren't working, so they're not vital for the continuance of the growth of the economy.
One of the concerns, I suppose, then, is that potentially we may find some people, even in their 60s, 70s, into their 80s, may be tempted to drive uninsured. You, as a lawyer, you tell them absolutely not to do that.
Definitely not. That would literally make them uninsurable in the future. You get 6 to 8 points for that heavy fine. I mean, that would be probably instant disqualification, and of course, maybe a compulsory retest. So some of them may never find themselves back on the road. So I would strongly advise against that. I'd search around. There are all sorts of insurance companies that specialise in older drivers. Be patient. Do your research. Look at the various websites, and you should find something, although I am hearing anecdotally horror stories out there of people with clean driving licenses who've never had a conviction, who are not that old. And I'm talking to you as a 67-year-old guy, so I fall within this category, and I drive 50,000 miles a year. And it's extremely difficult for some of these people to get insurance. So, as I say, it's an urgent problem that the government is going to deal with.
OK, we must leave it there. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Cool, that went quick, that hour, didn't it? Goodness me. These are the latest pictures reaching us from the coast of France. We'll have more in just a few moments' time here on Sky News. Morning, it's 8 o'clock on today's programme. The last major political hurdle cleared for the PM's Rwanda bill. Can anything stop flights taking off in a few weeks' time?
And how would Labour stop the boats? Well, we'll ask Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper in just a few minutes.
And do you think you're more productive in the office or is working from home more your cup of tea? We'll hear both sides of the office versus home tug of war.
We will. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of April, St George's Day.
The contents have it.
Controversial Rwanda bill set to become law after months of delays as we watch a boat launch off France this morning. We ask asylum seekers here how they feel.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum, don't come into UK.
Attacked with rubber bullets, we speak to the migrants in northern France who accuse police of drastic tactics to stop them getting to the Channel. Plus, with so much delay, the government admits accommodation for migrants is no longer available.
There are houses that are there already.
Have some of them been sold off?
There are houses that are there, that are in place,
Have
ready
some been sold
for...
off or not?
Of course houses have been sold, that is right.
Multi-million-pound funding boost announced for Ukraine as the PM heads to Poland. Bringing you all the highlights from inside court from the first day of Donald Trump's trial.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it.
View from the Met Police boss on the officer involved in this incident that's caused an anti-Semitism row.
Gelato al limone, gelato al limone, gelato al limone.
Why Milan wants to ban takeaway ice cream after a certain hour to protect residents. Good morning. After months of twists and turns, the government's controversial Rwanda bill is on the home straight, poised to become law after the House of Lords dropped the last of its amendments in a late-night parliamentary battle. It clears the way now for the government to begin deporting migrants to Rwanda, which the Prime Minister says will begin in 10 to 12 weeks' time. John Craig has our first report.
The question is that motion A be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content. The contents have it.
The moment peers in the House of Lords ended their long fight against the government's Safety of Rwanda bill. It came at the end of a day when Rishi Sunak demanded that MPs and peers sat through the night if necessary. An hour earlier, the Commons voted by a majority of 75 to throw out the last remaining Lords' amendment to the bill on a monitoring process on whether Rwanda is a safe country.
The Act will prevent people abusing the law by using false human rights claims to block removals.
The key moment during the latest round of ping-pong between Lords and Commons came when the government made a major concession on demands for an exemption from deportation to Rwanda for Afghan interpreters fleeing the Taliban. That led to a former Labour Defence Secretary withdrawing his amendment.
They left these people behind. They messed up any subsequent evacuation plan. This is a third opportunity competently to do the right thing.
So in the end, there was no need for sleeping bags or camp beds, and dire threats of votes at 3 a.m. never materialised. The long parliamentary battle over the Safety of Rwanda bill finally came to an end just after midnight. But the lone Tory rebel on the final day of debates on the bill now says he wants the policy to work.
It's vital that we move from process here in Parliament to making sure that this happens.
For the PM, now the battle in Parliament is over, he'll no longer be able to blame his political opponents if the policy doesn't take off. John Craig, Sky News.
Adam and Alice joining us now. Adam, you saw a inflatable boat launched just a few moments ago.
Yeah, it's been quite a busy past hour or so, Kay. First of all, we saw one boat come out from around the headland just there. It came out a while and then turned back. Clearly something had gone wrong with that boat. That was packed with people. And then about half an hour after that, another launch, a separate boat coming from a nearby but different source. And that one is out in the water there at the moment. It's probably, I'm guessing, 50 or so people packed aboard it. That one came out pretty fast, heading obviously out towards Britain, and now has also come to a halt. And we're keeping an eye on it to see if that is also going to head back towards French shores, or whether it may try to, I don't know, get an engine started again. These boats are flimsy. They are clearly not suited for crossing a busy shipping lane like this. So, as we said, they are very susceptible to problems. They normally have outboard motors that are not powerful enough. They are designed to take, let's say, 15 people on board. Maybe they have 50 or 60, so they're overladen. They're prone to taking in water, and they are not well built in the first place. So a lot of times they do fail. But plenty do get across, as we know, especially on a day like this when the water is pretty calm, the wind is barely existent, the visibility is good. So these are perfect conditions for launching a boat from France towards the UK. And of course, the question is, will this Rwanda bill be any kind of deterrent? We will be watching that. We certainly spoke to one French policeman a little earlier, and he said it will change nothing.
OK. Alice, what about where you are off the coast of the UK this morning?
Well, I'm at the Dover Strait, which is the most narrow point between France and England. And it is such a bright, clear day that I can very clearly see France on one side of me and then the White Cliffs of Dover on the other side. And because this is the most narrow point, this makes it the most popular area for people trying to make the dangerous journey from France to the UK. But I was just hearing from our skipper, who in fact was saying that because often the traffickers struggle with the tides, a lot of the asylum seekers end up being pushed further down towards areas like Eastbourne, which is a much further journey for them to come to the UK. Now in Dover, they've got along the cliffs, they've got a number of cameras that they're trying to use to spot any migrants who are coming over in small boats to try and detect. And Border Force also use drones regularly to try and pick up on those small boats. And in fact, on our radio, we're hearing every hour from the Coast Guard. They're giving warnings, asking anyone to be vigilant, to look out for anyone making those journeys on small boats. You really are getting an impression of how much money and effort that Border Force are having to do to patrol the waters here, keeping an eye on small boats. But as Adam was just saying there, the question is whether this new legislation will make any difference and deter people from making those journeys. So far, it hasn't. More than 6,000 people have so far crossed over to the UK this year. That's a 24% increase on the same period last year. The question is whether that will change now this new legislation comes into force.
OK, let's get a view from the Shadow Home Secretary, should we, joining us now. Yvette Cooper, it's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Kay.
What were you going to do to stop the boats?
Well, we've seen the images you've seen is dangerous boat crossings that are undermining our border security and putting lives at risk. That's why we need to boost our border security and also fix the chaos in the asylum system, including cross-border police to work actually in other European countries, not just along the French coast, but in Germany, in Belgium, through Bulgaria, right across Europe, where these supply lines are coming, so that we stop boats reaching the French coast in the first place, so that we can properly smash the criminal gang networks, and also have fast-track systems when people arrive in the UK, so you fast-track decisions for safe countries, and have a new returns and enforcement unit, because, unfortunately, returns have dropped by nearly 50% under the Conservatives. That's for failed asylum cases. That means the system's not just not being enforced. So we've got to tackle both the asylum chaos in the system in the UK and also boost and strengthen our border security to prevent boats arriving in the first place.
The government says that's not much of a plan. In fact, it's not a plan at all. And what you would do is scrap this law if you did come into power. What would you say in response?
So the problem with the Rwanda scheme is this is an extortionately expensive gimmick, that it's not a serious plan to tackle these dangerous boat crossings, and it's costing us around over £500 million for just 300 people. It's less than 1% of asylum seekers, and there's no plan. The government has no plan at all for the 99%. So it adds up to around nearly £2 million per asylum seeker. That money could be going into substantially boosting our border security instead. And that's the damage. There's the sort of distraction of the government's focus just on having the gimmick, the headlines, on something that really not even senior Conservatives think will work.
What would you say to the commercial airline which the government says they have on standby to take people to Rwanda?
Well, the government, we know, will be making all sorts of practical arrangements, actually extremely costly ones, because we know the costs have gone up.
Airline?
I think that's a matter for the government to make the contracts and things that it wants to do. But the problem is, it is writing cheques for taxpayers' money. The first thing that they're going to do is actually not about what they do with an airline. It's not about letters that go out to people or detention centres or any of the things in the papers. The first thing they're going to do is write another cheque for £50 million to Rwanda, even though so far more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers have gone to Rwanda, but yet their first act is going to be to write another unconditional £50 million cheque. I don't think that's the right approach to taxpayers' money. We need to tackle these dangerous crossings. We need to make sure we've got stronger border security, and we need to make sure we're not just spending loads of money on a gimmick that's just about headlines.
But given that the infrastructure is now or soon will be in place, is it something that you would keep at least in the interim?
Well, we think we should replace this because you need to put...
Yeah, but would you keep it in the interim?
Well, the problem is that all they're doing each time is they're just writing more and more cheques. So at every stage, you know, even in order to set up flights, even in order to send 300 people, they'll have to write another £120 million cheque. So at every stage, even for this small scheme that's just 1% of asylum seekers arriving, that will still cost hundreds of millions of pounds more. And we just think we shouldn't be writing those cheques to Rwanda. We should be putting that money straight away, quickly, into this plan to go after the criminal gangs and strengthen our border security.
So from day
instead.
one, if you win the next general election, you will scrap this scheme. Nobody during a Labour government will go to Rwanda.
Well, we will replace it. What you can't do is just stick with the status quo. That is clearly not working. So the point is to replace the Rwanda scheme with the cross-border policing, the new returns and enforcement unit, so that you actually properly make the system work and properly strengthen border security.
But can you envisage a situation where at least some people in the interim will find themselves under a potential Labour government going to Rwanda?
We're not going to do the Rwanda scheme because every time you do, you have to write more cheques. No, we're not going to do the Rwanda scheme.
So nobody will go?
So our plan is not to do the Rwanda scheme. Instead, it's to put the money instead into investing actually in our border security and preventing boats arriving in the first place. No, that's not our plan.
OK. Talk to me about the anti-Semitism row last weekend. It's likely to spill over again next weekend because we've heard from the man in question, Gideon Falter, who says that he will walk perhaps with some of his friends again next to a pro-Palestinian march next weekend. What's Labour's view?
Well, I think we had the incident last weekend, and obviously it was wrong what the police officer had said and the initial response from the Metropolitan Police. I do, though, think the police have a really complex and challenging job. We have the historic right to protest in this country, and that is long-standing, and there are people with very strong views, particularly about what is happening in Gaza. There can never be any place for anti-Semitism, and there has to be strong action against anti-Semitism, and people have a right to free speech and to express their views. What the police are trying to do...
This wasn't anti-Semitism, though, was it?
No, but there have been cases, and there were some other shouts. No, and there were some shouts from the crowd.
That police officer was not anti-Semitic.
No. But I think But what I think he said about being openly Jewish was the wrong thing to say. What you did hear, I thought, for some of the footage, suggested that there were some shouts that were troubling from the crowd.
From the protesters.
Exactly. So that has to be dealt with. But I think we also have to recognise that the police are trying to do a serious job to keep people safe. They are working immensely hard to do so. I think the calls that we had, for example, earlier in the week for the Metropolitan Commissioner to resign were completely wrong. I think the Metropolitan Police Commissioner is working really hard to keep London safe, actually to reform the Metropolitan Police as well, and to make sure that it is responsive to communities. But these are difficult situations and the police are in the middle of that, trying to make sure that everyone is kept safe, and we should recognise the important job they are doing.
So even when you're Home Secretary faced with this sort of challenge and you've got the Met Commissioner in front of you and he's faced potentially with a similar situation, what would you be asking him about ahead of next weekend's stroll, walk versus march?
Well, the first thing is that the operational policing decisions have to be left to the police. That is an important constitutional principle that we have in this country. It's also the best way of making sure you get effective decisions rather than politicians who don't have experience of public order policing.
Let me interject there, if I may. Do you think wrong decisions were made last weekend?
I think there was wrong wording was used, wrong handling was taken. But actually, I am not going to second-guess decisions made by officers who are trying to deal with very complex public order situations. They've got to make the best decision that they can in those circumstances, dealing with issues around wanting to keep everybody safe in those circumstances.
But the Home Office Minister, who was sat there an hour ago, said to me that people should be allowed to walk through a march if they want to.
That has to be a public order decision for the police. I mean, I've been in situations where there were marches going past where the police will ask you to, could you take this route, could you take that route, and so on. And I think, you know, those in the end have got to be decisions for the police. We want everybody to feel safe on the streets of the capital. That is really important. We want people to be able to go where they need to go and for people to be able to say the things that they feel as well. So you've got to challenge any anti-Semitism. You've also got to have the historic traditions, whether it be of free speech or of protest that we've got. And the police, we just recognise they do have a challenging job, caught in the middle of all of that, and, you know, recognise how complex it is for them to do that job.
Would you be celebrating St George's Day like the boss?
Do you know, we have in Pontefract, we very often have the St George's flag flying from Pontefract Castle. And so, yes, we very often had the bunting up. And actually, yesterday we were at St George's Park, where the England team train, which was brilliant as well.
So, yes, is the answer.
Happy St George's Day, Kate. Happy St George's Day.
It's good to see you, as always. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Look at these pictures that we've got just reaching us. This is the English Channel today, this off Dunkirk in France, where my colleague has seen at least two boats, small boats, having been launched earlier on today. That's one of them. There were some problems with it. And we've also seen from the cliffs of Dover as well the situation there. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will visit Warsaw today, where he's set to announce a record package of military funding for Ukraine, including the UK's largest ever delivery of vital equipment like vehicles and missiles. That's exciting, isn't it? Should we go into a little bit more detail, then talk to Deborah about it? £500 million of additional funding for a range of military support, including drones supplied by the UK. It means that overall, the UK will be spending £3 billion in military aid for Ukraine this financial year to help them defend against Russia's invasion. The Ministry of Defence will send more than 400 vehicles, the largest ever single package of equipment from the UK. It'll also send more than 1,600 strike and air defence missiles, as well as additional Storm Shadow long-range precision-guided missiles. Oh, it's a mouthful, Deborah. What do they do?
They're the ones like Storm Shadow, which the Ukrainians have been using to strike Russian targets in occupied Crimea, for example. And they've been very effective against the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which has diminished in size by about a quarter over the last year or so. So pretty important that we're sending those. But, you know, you've seen that long list. One source said to me when this came out last night, why is it only happening now. Like, we have seen Ukraine struggling desperately for the last few months against a resurgent Russia that has been pushing them, challenging them at different points along the front line. You've had the Ukrainians made to wait 6 months for the Americans to finally pass that huge package of aid, the $61 billion that is so much needed. And clearly now the Prime Minister coming out, making this announcement in Poland about the support that the UK is giving, which is obviously going to be welcome. But is it too late to make a difference on the ground? And the other question too, he's obviously meeting with the Polish leader. He's going to meet with the German leader too, talking about European security. And a big question for Britain is, you have a Prime Minister who likes to talk tough, but where is the money that's going to support this?
Yeah, exactly. For now. Thanks so much indeed. Thanks a lot. Have you got the headlines?
I do have the headlines. Good morning. I certainly have. I've got all of them.
Excellent.
All the headlines you ever
Standing
want.
by.
Let's start, shall we, actually, with the number of alcohol-related deaths in the UK. It's reached a record high, shooting up rapidly at the start of the pandemic. New figures show that in 2022, more than 10,000 people died as a direct consequence of drinking, which is around a third higher compared with 2019. They were highest in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the northeast of England. More smokers are trying to curb the habit as a result of the cost of living crisis. A pack of cigarettes is expected to tip over £16 from October 2026. That's after tobacco duty was increased in the spring budget. Researchers from University College London found more than 5,500 people who were surveyed. Each of them had made an attempt to quit over the past 12 months. The Metropolitan Police has agreed an independent force will review the handling of new evidence relating to the murder of Stephen Lawrence, 30 years on from his killing. Stephen was stabbed to death in a racist attack by a gang in South London. Only 2 of his killers have ever been brought to justice. The original investigation was criticised in the landmark Macpherson report back in 1999, which found the Met to be institutionally racist. Borrowing figures for the last financial year have overshot forecasts, dealing a blow to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Office for National Statistics figures revealed that borrowing hit £120.7 billion as wages and benefit payments soared. The ONS had estimated that full-year public sector net borrowing was £7.6 billion less than in 2023, but £6.6 billion more than predicted by the UK's official forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility. Turn our attention to the United States, where Donald Trump faces the second day of his criminal trial today in one of the most high-profile cases in American history. The court's already heard prosecutors accusing him of waging an illegal scheme to corrupt election results. James Matthews has the details.
It is the rare sight, now routine, of a former president on a daily court run. Donald Trump snaked through the streets of Manhattan in the cavalcade that carves a new chapter in US legal and political history. This was a day for opening statements from prosecution and defence, and from the defendant by the door.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning, and it's very unfair.
Donald Trump, as a criminal defendant, is a spectacle in itself.
The courtroom is incredibly dingy.
Author Michael Wolff was inside court.
It's very rare for someone like Donald Trump or for any celebrity to be in front of the public for so many hours. I mean, he is naked before us.
The prosecution case is that porn star Stormy Daniels was paid off to keep an affair with Trump quiet just before the 2016 election. Trump's lawyer made the payment, and when he was reimbursed, it was put through the books as something else. The prosecution says that was the falsification of business records that amounted to election interference. They told the jury, this case is about criminal conspiracy. It was election fraud, pure and simple. Trump's defense attorney told them, there's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. Opening statements saw Trump's defense unveiled as attack on the former lawyer Michael Cohen, who paid the porn star. They said he was obsessed with getting Trump. The first witness has now taken the stand, David Pecker, who used to publish the National Enquirer magazine. He helped to orchestrate a so-called catch and kill scheme to catch negative stories about Donald Trump and kill them before they reach the public arena. For Donald Trump, it is the evidence of friends and foes, and his future depends on it.
Seems our problem with potholes continues to deepen. That's as new data shows pothole-related breakdowns in the UK were up 9% in the past year alone. In the year to the end of March, the RAC says it was called out to over 27,000 breakdowns caused by crumbling roads. That's up more than 3,000 on the previous year.
What about the people at the heart of the challenge with Rwanda? Sky's Becky Johnson has been speaking to asylum seekers in Derby, some who have already been warned they could be sent to Rwanda.
You are all welcome here in Derby, and it is important that your voices can be heard by the Home Office in London.
The welcome offered by this charity in Derby, in contrast with the government's intention to send people here to Rwanda. Several of these asylum seekers have been told they're being considered for removal. Hamza, who's from Iran, received this letter from the Home Office saying it may ask Rwanda whether it would admit him. I'm very stressed, he tells me. I don't know what to do. All I can think about is this letter and Rwanda. And for everyone still waiting to hear the outcome of their asylum claim, the concern is no news means bad news.
Your name? Rwanda is not a safe place.
Does it make you regret coming to the UK?
Yeah, if before I came here, you say that, they sent me in Rwanda. I never come here.
Fatima says she doesn't regret leaving Afghanistan.
I fled my country in order to be safe, yeah? Otherwise, I'm gonna killed by Taliban.
How do you feel that you could now get sent to Rwanda?
It is not fair, especially for the one who came from Afghanistan.
Outside the meeting, Masood, who's from Iran, reveals an email confirming he too is being considered for Rwanda.
Would you have come to the UK if you'd have known you could end up in Rwanda?
Never. Never.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum, don't come to UK.
His words could be seized on by the government as evidence the Rwanda plan will work as a deterrent. But the Prime Minister also needs it to work as a vote winner. And in Derby city centre, we found feelings are mixed.
You support people being sent to Rwanda?
If not there, then somewhere.
I'm pretty sure it's going to cost a lot of money, so when that could be put into other places in the country.
People who are small-minded will just go, yeah, great, it gets rid of people, or things like that.
Whether it now happens this summer matters to the success of the policy and the people waiting to see if they'll be on a plane. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Derby.
Serious ongoing situation off the coast of France. Adam Parsons standing by. Adam, what's happening?
Yeah, this is a report from an organisation called La Voix du Nord, which is a media company based quite locally in this area, and they are reporting that in Wimereux, which is further down the coast from us, there has been an incident, a really serious incident involving a migrant vessel, and they are saying that there are 5 people at least who have died in this incident. Now, we have spoken to the French Maritime Prefecture, which covers this region. They have told us that they can't confirm those deaths as of yet, but they have confirmed that there is an operation ongoing. We've just looked at a maritime data app. There are 4 vessels that have already come into that tight area near Wimereux, including Coast Guard vessels and also naval cutter, which are clearly assisting in what is evidently a major operation. Now, Wimereux is also an area. There have already been deaths off the coast of Wimereux this year involving migrant crossings. We have seen where I am, which is just on a beach near Dunkirk, already a series of dinghies emerging, trying to get across to Britain. There was one that is just over my shoulder at the moment, which is also being accompanied by a Coast Guard vessel. The conditions, to be honest, Kay, are perfect at the moment for launching these boats. It is calm, the water is very still. We should emphasise, though, that these boats are invariably ill-suited to crossing this very busy maritime crossing between France and Britain. There are frequently problems. The dinghy we were watching has gone back into port. One of them has gone back into port earlier, clearly because of a fault. So that tells you that these boats simply aren't suited at all to these crossing, and sometimes they fail in the most tragic way. That is what appears to have happened off the coast of Wimereux, with these reports of an awful failing, with 5 people at least said to have died. I've just got some information being passed to me now. Yeah, Sky News has spoken to a spokesperson who has confirmed that they believe there are at least several lifeless bodies in the water. So they have confirmed to us that, in their opinion, there are fatalities today off the coast of Wimereux, linked to an attempted migrant crossing. And this, of course, hugely resonant, happening on the day when the Rwanda bill will go into legislation. I'm sure those who endorse that bill will say that this is exactly the sort of deterrent that is needed to stop these perilous crossings organised by people smugglers as they try to get from here in the coast of northern France over to the UK. Of course, right now we will be chasing more and more details about that. We'll bring it to you as soon as we get them.
Just before I let you go, Adam, let's just take a moment. So, you have seen at least one boat this morning where you are, on the coast of France, near to Dunkirk. A little bit further up the coast, there had been reports of another boat, an inflatable, that had been trying to leave the coast of France, making its perilous journey across to the United Kingdom. The weather conditions are good today, but nevertheless incredibly challenging for that sort of vessel. What's happened?
Yeah, so just to reiterate, we'll talk about 2 locations. Where we are is just near Dunkirk, and what we have seen are a number of vessels that have left here, and there's one, just a dot to me, but actually it's sort of thin black line. That is a migrant boat over there, an inflatable dinghy. It's probably got 40, 50 people on it. We've previously seen 2 others that have come out, got into the water, and then turned back again because of fault. And Kay, that is something that you see here. These small boats coming out from this northern French coast, particularly on days like this. Blue skies. When we arrived here in the night, the moon was shining down, lighting up the area. The wind is low. The sea conditions are calm. And we knew this in advance because you can get these apps. We know which ones they are. The people smugglers use the same apps which show them. You can predict the nights when there are low winds. So what we've seen is activity here. Also seen a lot of police around. They know, they use the same apps. They know when it's going to be a calm day. They reinforce the police activity. But this is a long coast and it undulates in and out. It's very, very hard to stop everyone who's carrying a boat getting down onto these beaches. The smugglers know what they're doing. They hide in the dunes. Now, Wimereux, which is round the coast, is a different thing. There aren't dunes there. It's almost like a town which has almost like a promenade, and you can very quickly get a boat from a vehicle with people and get it into the water. It's a popular location for people smugglers, for launches. Our understanding, now confirmed by a spokesperson, is that there has been a tragic accident there involving a migrant boat, that there are at least several lifeless bodies, people who have died in the water. We understand there are at least 4 vessels off the coast of Wimereux, that there is a 5th naval cutter. We are told there are helicopters up in the air. This is a major operation. Reports of survivors, people being taken to hospital, some of them in a very, very serious condition. And Wimereux is a town that already earlier this year witnessed the deaths of several migrants in a boat there, which got into trouble really not far from the coast. I was there the following day. It was a freezing day. There were people who had fallen into the water and had died of a combination of hypothermia and leading to drowning. So that town is wearily accustomed to the spectre of death because of these migrant boats trying to get from France over to the UK. The initial reports suggest that this would be at least 5 dead. Now, that would take us to, I believe, there were 9 people who'd already died this year trying to get from France to the United Kingdom. If this report is confirmed, that would take us to 14, which I believe eclipses the number who died throughout the entirety of 2023 making these crossings. And I think one thing we should really take from today is these are perfect conditions. If you were daft enough to try to cross the channel in a completely unsuitable rubber dinghy overloaded with people, this is the day you would choose to do it. The light is good, the wind is low, the sea is calm. If a tragedy like this has happened on a day like this, off this coast, then to be blunt, it can happen at any point. And I think we do have to emphasise, for those who have not followed this, these boats are simply not designed for these crossings. They are often imported from Turkey, from China, rubber boats. It might be okay with a dozen people in them, but they normally have 45, 50 people. The numbers are growing. People smugglers are putting more and more people in these boats. The boats are getting bigger. And what would appear to have happened today on the face of it is that one of these crossings has gone terribly wrong. They often fail, but this one seems to have gone terribly wrong and resulted in a horrendous loss of life.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the figures. Every one of them, a human being who has perished in the Channel. 71 souls lost since 2018 is what I'm reading, and then adding to that potentially 5 more people who have died today. Why, given the conditions, why is it that so many people are perishing in this treacherous crossing? I was reading that the boats are becoming more and more overloaded.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Over the past few years, I suppose since I've been covering these crossings over 5 years, when I think we started, they were smaller boats with a smaller number of people. The average number of people on these boats is going up. Why is that? Well, ultimately, it's about packing as many people onto a boat as you can. If you're a people smuggler, you're paying somewhere between, let's say, 6,000 and 14,000 euros for one of these boats. And you treat it as a business. You try and get as many people on it as you can. Maybe people are paying 2,000 each for a seat. You have other costs. But if you put 50 people on a boat, let's say 100,000 euros that you're earning. And of course, that improves your business model. It is, of course, an absolutely horrendous business model, because what that means is that these boats, which are designed for, as I said, maybe a dozen, 14 people, are pushed down further in the water. They start taking on water more readily. The engines that are fitted to them are invariably substandard, underpowered, unreliable, second or third hand. They are not suitable. People on board may or may not be given life jackets. Those life jackets may or may not be the right size. They may not be a decent quality. I've seen lots of people going out in these boats without any kind of life jacket. I've spoken to somebody who sells life jackets to these people smugglers, reluctantly otherwise, and has told me the stories of selling them children's size ones because that's all the money they would spend. So these boats are unsuitable. The people on board them are often ill-equipped. The person who's steering it is normally not in any way an experienced seaman. This is often somebody who is simply a migrant but is given either free passage or reduced cost in return for doing the navigating of this boat. And so what then happens is that boat, to be blunt, sits too low in the water, and all it takes is a few waves or to be navigated against the flow of waves, and suddenly it can become waterlogged. As it becomes waterlogged, it falls further down into the water and can end up being swamped. And at that point, you are then in a position where a boat is under the water, full of dozens of people, some of whom have life jackets, some of whom may not be able to swim, some of whom are children. And of course, it doesn't take much imagination to see how that can end up with a horrendous situation. The sun is up, but remember, the English Channel is cold. It's cold water out there. In winter, your survival rate is not long. Even now, as the temperature is going out at night, this place is freezing cold. And that water would be treacherous to fall into. And I can tell you from experience, during the night, it is inky black out there as well. Hard to see what you're doing. Just looking over my shoulder, the dinghy that we have followed over the course of the morning, it is still out there. It's actually got a French Coast Guard ship is running ahead of it. But the law here also is quite clear. Once these boats get into the water, there is nothing the police can do to intercept them. They can't wade in and pull the boats back in. That is effectively the rules that the police operate by, is that they can slice these boats open as they're being carried down to the beach. They can stop people getting on the boats, but once they are in the water, once the boat is in the water, they can't do anything. They say that at that point is too perilous an enterprise to start cutting up the boats. So they can't do that. What we do know, to reiterate for those joining us now, is we do know there's a very, very significant operation happening off the coast of Wimereux, and we have been told that there are lifeless bodies in the water.
Just before I let you go, Adam, I know that you need to head off to continue covering this story for us, but the latest I'm reading is that 5 people died, 1 in hospital with very serious conditions, and that after the boat had already launched and they were trying to get from the beach in the freezing conditions to the water in the early hours of this morning around 1:45 local time. And I just wanted your take on this. Many of the people who are trying to get on these boats can't swim.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Many people can't swim, they don't have safety equipment. There are, invariably, you will see on these boats children. And at that time, if that is right, it's at 1:45. It sounds ridiculous, but some of these areas here, just at that time of night, do sometimes feel particularly bleak, dark. Although I have to say, tonight there was a big moon out shining light on this area, but the water would have been very cold. It is disorientating out there. That would have been a perilous and extremely unpleasant and frightening position for anyone to be in. But as you said, Kate, for people who can't swim, who maybe, we don't know the circumstance, who don't have inadequate safety equipment, it is often a recipe for disaster. We've seen it many, many times on these beaches, and there are times when you think, this could, I've seen certainly many things where you think, well, that could have gone horribly wrong, but it didn't. The brutal truth is that it's a game of chance. Very often these boats do get across in one piece, but sometimes the luck runs out, and that can have dreadful consequences.
OK, Adam, I must let you go. Thank you very much indeed for the update. What we know is that 5 migrants have reportedly died while attempting to cross the Channel to the UK from France. A boat was reported to be in difficulty near Wimereux Beach, Pas de Calais, at around 1:45 local time. France's maritime prefecture at the Channel and the North Sea. That is what they were telling us. Apparently, the boat left the beach. They found themselves in difficulty at sea to reach the boat. That, according to local media, the migrants trying to reach a boat in freezing water in an effort to cross the Channel. We'll get more on that. But Murray, talk to me, if you would please, about how the government might react to this.
Well, we're waiting to hear from the Home Office, whether that be James Cleverly or maybe a comment from the Prime Minister on this. So we'll bring that to our viewers as soon as we hear anything from the government. I think the expectation will be there will be, I assume, a kind of heartfelt statement about the loss of life in the Channel. And then, to be honest, I would expect to an extent a bit of a doubling down on the fact that today is the day we've seen the Rwanda bill, Safety of Rwanda bill, passed through Parliament and off for royal assent later this week. I think the expectation essentially will be that the government will say this is exactly why we need to get this bill through. This is exactly why we need to make sure that we can stop these kinds of crossings, and the only way to do that is to stop the incentive for people to come on those boats, and that is how to protect people's lives, such as the people who appear to have lost their lives this morning or last night. We don't know quite when exactly this happened yet in the Channel. So I think there will be a heartfelt statement, but also I expect them to say that the Rwanda bill is essentially exactly why this kind of thing needs to stop, and people need to stop losing their lives in the Channel, and that's why they're bringing in the
Just tell us what happened last night in the House of Commons.
So it was essentially what we call parliamentary ping-pong between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So it went back and forth a few times last night. The bill actually passed finally, technically it was today, because it was in the small hours after midnight. And essentially the Lords were concerned about two issues. So they were concerned about, they wanted an independent body to be able to say that Rwanda was a safe country rather than just the UK government saying so. That was one of the amendments that they were pushing back and forth and back and forth. And the other one was about Afghan veterans, those who've served alongside the UK armed forces in Afghanistan are potentially being hunted by the Taliban and therefore lives are at risk. Now, that was the amendment that finally the government gave way on, and they did allow that from the Lords, whereas they didn't give way on the other amendment around the safety of Rwanda and having that independent body. It was passed through and finally approved, and now this week we're going to see it have royal assent, so it will become law this week.
OK, this is what the Minister told us this morning.
Then it's inevitable, I'm afraid, there are going to be challenges. It's inevitable that people are going to try and throw everything in this at this to try and stop this plan from working. I mean, frankly, we saw last night from the Labour Party and from the Labour Lords, they seem more determined to stop the flights. We're determined to stop the boats. There will be challenges, but we will meet them. We will overcome them. There are houses that are there. It's an uncapped scheme. Rwanda is a very welcoming country, and it is there. It is ready to take. It's already housing 135,000 migrants there already. It's an incredibly welcoming country.
Some of those houses have been sold off. Is that not right?
There are houses that are there. Already.
Have some of them been sold off?
There are houses that are there, that are in place, ready
been sold
for...
off or not?
Of course houses have been sold, that is right, but it's mixed housing. No, it's mixed housing. These aren't ghettos where people are going to be put in Rwanda. It's mixed housing, part of the policy for Rwanda to welcome refugees. I think what we haven't heard enough
but the
Poise
Riverside estate was set up for these people that were coming from the UK. It's been delayed so much that as a result, some of those houses have now been sold off to local people. Is that right or not?
That is right. It was always inevitably going to be that way because it was for mixed housing. It wasn't just for refugee housing, and that's a really important point.
Interesting that he called them refugees. Let's bring in Alice, who's standing by in Dover, off the coast of Dover, I should say. As the Minister has subsequently said, chilling news that more people, it would appear, have lost their lives trying to cross the Channel.
Yes, that's right, Kay. We're hearing that 5 people have unfortunately lost their lives this morning trying to make the dangerous journey from France over to the UK. And right where I'm standing now, I can see France on one side of me and Dover on the left of me, and where I'm at what's called the Dover Strait, and it's the most narrow point between France and the UK, and this makes it a particularly popular area for migrants who are trying to make their way over to the UK, but also makes it particularly dangerous for a number of reasons. I mean, looking around right now, I can see about 20 ships that are in my eye line because, of course, the English Channel, this is the busiest shipping route in the world. It makes it incredibly dangerous for migrants who are coming over. To dodge that, of course, these are not proper skippers who are trying to navigate boats across. And what we were hearing is that some of these boats, because the people who are navigating it, the traffickers, aren't aware of the tides, they end up being dragged further down and further away from England, and it ends up being that their journey takes longer, which, of course, if you're in a small dinghy with people who aren't able to navigate it, that can, of course, be dangerous, and so dangerous that, unfortunately, it ends up with people losing their lives. And important to stress the conditions as well. well. At the moment, it's calm, it's very bright, it's therefore made it much more appealing for people to make that journey. But it is really cold, and a lot of people, when they set off from France, it's bright, it's early in the morning, hopefully trying to do it before they're intercepted by anybody. But this morning, we got here at about 6 o'clock, and the temperatures were very, very low. And of course, if people then get into difficulties going into the water, people are unable to swim, it's therefore not, unfortunately, surprising that some people end up losing their lives. And we have been hearing on our radio today, every hour we're hearing warnings from the Coast Guard, warning any boats that are in the vicinity to be vigilant, to keep an eye out for any vessels that are trying to make their way over to the UK. And in Dover itself, along the cliffs, they've got special cameras that are trying to pick up on any of the small boats. They've also got drones that are operating in the area at the moment. Those are Coast Guard drones trying to pick up on their small boats. So it's a huge operation by Border Force trying to police these waters. But what our understanding is that the majority of the boats are actually being picked up as soon as they've left France by the French authorities. And unfortunately, in the case of today, it's ended up that 5 people have unfortunately died crossing the English Channel.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Reading more reports on this now, some suggesting that those that have perished were trying to get onto the boat. Other reports I'm reading are suggesting that they were already on the inflatable, but have sadly, nevertheless, lost their lives. Adam put it as being wearily accustomed to the spectre of death.
Yeah, he was describing that town, wasn't he? The French town of Wimborough, and then lots of other towns along that coastline. It's a tragic story, and it's one of these moments where, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about immigration when it comes to government policy. We spend a lot of time talking about the Rwanda policy, and it's always a reminder every single time this happens of exactly what is happening, why the government say they want to implement that policy, but also the real human suffering and the human experience of the people on those dinghies. As we've seen over the past several years now, not everyone makes it to the other side, and it is a really stark reminder of exactly what is happening in the Channel and the amount of suffering and, unfortunately, a loss of life we see again and again and again.
We spoke to the Shadow Home Secretary this morning before this latest news came through that 5 people have died, bringing the death toll, at least 5 people have died, bringing the death toll this year to already 14 of those desperate enough to try to cross the Channel. This is what she said.
The problem is that all they're doing each time is they're just writing more and more checks. So at every stage, you know, even in order to set up flights, even in order to send 300 people, they'll have to write another £120 million check. So at every stage, even for this small scheme that's just 1% of asylum seekers arriving, that will still cost hundreds of millions of pounds more. And we just think we shouldn't be writing those checks to Rwanda. We should be putting that money straight away, quickly, into this plan to go after the criminal gangs and strengthen our border security.
So from day
instead.
one, if you win the next general election, you will scrap this scheme. Nobody during a Labour government will go to Rwanda.
Well, we will replace it. What you can't do is just stick with the status quo. That is clearly not working. So the point is to replace the Rwanda scheme with the cross-border policing, the new returns and enforcement unit, so that you actually properly make the system work and properly strengthen border security.
But can you envisage a situation where at least some people in the interim will find themselves under a potential Labour government going to Rwanda?
We're not going to do the Rwanda scheme because every time you do, you have to write more checks. No, we're not going to do the Rwanda scheme.
So nobody will go?
So our plan is not to do the Rwanda scheme. Instead, it's to put the money into investing actually in our border security and preventing boats arriving in the first place. No, that's not our plan.
Speaking before the news that at least 5 migrants have died during attempts to cross the Channel, we're told today, and that according to a local newspaper in the town of Wimmero, La Voix du Nord. The French Coast Guard confirming there was a failed attempt to cross the Channel, and said police were operating at a beach following the incident on Tuesday morning, adding there were several lifeless bodies in the water. local police not immediately confirming what happened, but we can tell you that the Coast Guard said its agents were still operating at sea this morning after what the official called a busy morning with several crossing attempts, at least one of them witnessed by our man on the ground, Adam Parsons. Of course, it's one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, and people smugglers typically using overloaded rickety dinghies with people who can't swim. Some of them don't have life jackets on. And as a result, we see this sort of tragedy, which the government will say is exactly why they're trying to deter it. Although it's up 24% this year, I believe.
It is, yeah. So we are, as 2024 goes, we are actually above where we were last year, which is an uncomfortable truth for the government to have to confront. I think also this is a classic case of profit over people, and part of the reason some of these dinghies sink, as Adam Parsons was explaining, is that they are, as you were saying, overloaded. They are not necessarily in the best condition, and therefore they can find themselves in difficulty because the people who are sending them off are focusing on the money that they're making rather than the quality of life of the people on board. And that's why we see these things happening again and again. Now, one thing that is a cross-party consensus on this, no matter who you speak to, Labour or Tory, they do say these do need to stop. They don't want to see more loss of life in the Channel, like we look like we're hearing from those reports just now. The difference between Labour and Tories and Lib Dems as well is how to stop these boats and how to stop people dying in the Channel. And that's where they differ. Both parties believe that their plan is the right one and the only effective one. Labour's is about cross-border collaboration with European nations, not just France, but also other nations across Europe to kind of get to the root of the problem. Whereas the Tories is very much, you know, disincentivised by people by sending them to Rwanda, so there's no point in them coming in the first place.
OK. So what we do know is the morning after the British government passed their latest law, which will mean, they say, within 10 to 12 weeks that boats, people coming over to the UK in boats will be sent to Rwanda. The government say they have a plan in place and that flights will go within the next 10 to 12 weeks to Rwanda. On that, the morning after that, at least 5 migrants have died in an attempt to cross the Channel from an area near the town of Wimereux. That, according to the local newspaper La Voix du Nord, the French Coast Guard is still at the scene. They say several lifeless bodies have been found in the water. Police are offering no comment at this time. 5 people, it's reported, at least have died after the latest fatal attempt. morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock. Breaking news in the Channel this morning. The French Coast Guard responds to a failed attempt by migrants to cross. There are lifeless bodies in the water on the morning after the Rwanda bill passes.
Plus, the government admits delays in the parliament mean housing migrants in Rwanda are no longer available, and Labour say they'd replace the plan entirely.
Elsewhere in the programme, how to keep faith in peace and reconciliation after unimaginable loss. Grieving mothers from an Israeli-Palestinian organisation were here to tell us their heartfelt stories.
It's Tuesday, the 23rd of April. At least 5 migrants have died attempting to cross the Channel. We've also seen pictures of other migrants setting off this morning and have been speaking to migrants here.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum, don't come into UK.
Attacked with rubber bullets, we speak to the migrants in northern France who accuse police of drastic tactics to stop them getting to the Channel. Plus, with so much delay, the government admits accommodation for migrants is no longer available. It was set up for these people that were coming from the UK. It's been delayed so much that as a result, some of those houses have now been sold off to local people.
Well,
is that right or not?
That is right.
Okay.
It was always inevitably going to be that way.
Multi-million-pound funding boost announced for Ukraine as the PM heads to Poland. We'll bring you all the highlights from inside court from the first day of Donald Trump's trial.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it.
View from the Met Police boss on the police officer involved in this incident that's caused an anti-Semitism row. Good morning. At least 5 migrants have died in an attempt to cross the English Channel. The French Coast Guard says there are lifeless bodies in the freezing waters. The Coast Guard are still at sea and police were operating at a beach following the incident near Wimereux. These pictures of a dinghy setting off from the French coast near Dunkirk this morning in what's being reported as a busy morning for migrant crossings already. And our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons has the latest from the northern coast of France near Dunkirk.
We'll talk about 2 locations. Where we are is just near Dunkirk, and what we have seen are a number of vessels that have left here. And there's one, just a dot to me, but actually it's sort of thin black line. That is a migrant boat over there, an inflatable dinghy. It's probably got 40, 50 people on it. We've previously seen 2 others that have come out, got into the water and then turned back again because of fault. And Kay, that is something that you see here. These small boats coming out from this northern French coast. It's particularly on days like this, blue skies. When we arrived here in the night, the moon was shining down, lighting up the area. The wind is low, the sea conditions are calm. And we knew this in advance because you can get these apps. We know which ones they are. The people smugglers use the same apps which show them. You can predict the nights when there are low winds. So what we've seen is activity here. Also seen a lot of police around. That they know, they use the same apps, they know when it's going to be a calm day, they reinforce the police activity. But this is a long coast and it undulates in and out. It's very, very hard to stop everyone who's carrying a boat getting down onto these beaches. The smugglers know what they're doing. They hide in the dunes. Now, Wimereux, which is round the coast, is a different thing. There aren't dunes there. It's almost like a town which has almost like a promenade, and you can very quickly get a boat from a vehicle with people and get it into the water. It's a popular location for people smugglers, for launches. Our understanding, now confirmed by a spokesperson, is that there has been a tragic accident there involving a migrant boat, that there are at least several lifeless bodies, people who've died in the water. We understand there are at least 4 vessels off the coast of Wimereux, that there is a 5th naval cutter. We are told there are helicopters up in the air. This is a major operation. Reports of survivors, people being taken to hospital, some of them in a very, very serious condition.
Alice standing by for us off the coast of Dover. Absolute tragedy again, Alice.
Yeah, and there's a lot of activity we're now seeing here in the English Channel. We've just seen in the last few minutes, Border Force's boat Volunteer has just been quickly moving away from where we are at the moment in a southwest direction. We presume going to the area of Wimereux, which is about 20 miles from where we are at the moment. It's further sort of southwest, closer to France from where we are at the moment. And it's no surprise that Border Force has gone to the area because of the sad news that we've heard in the last half hour or so of 5 migrants who have unfortunately died, making this incredibly dangerous journey from France to the UK. And where I am at the moment, this is the most narrow point between France and the UK, and this makes it a very popular route for people to try and get their way over to the UK. But it is also the largest shipping route in the world. It's the busiest one. And I can see, just looking around me at the moment, I can see all sorts of different vessels, probably about 20 within my eye line at the moment. And you've got people who are not experienced navigators, who are often trafficking people to the country, who are not able to understand the tides and the complexities that come with the English Channel. And therefore, it's no surprise that, unfortunately, many of them barely leave the French coast before they get into trouble, and that's our understanding of that's what's happened today. And unfortunately, 5 people are believed to have lost their life, and 1 person is being treated in hospital. But it is important to stress there have been more than 6,000 small boats that have crossed over to the UK so far this year, and the weather is obviously just improving. It's no surprise that those asylum seekers made that journey today when it's bright, it's calm, it's good conditions. And of course, as we start to get into later spring and later summer, we could expect more of those boats to make those journeys. But of course, that is something that Rishi Sunak is obviously hoping that won't happen because of the new legislation that he's bringing in.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, as we've been saying, the deaths have happened on the morning after the government's Rwanda bill passed. Speaking to us before the tragic news broke, Michael Tomlinson, the Minister of State for Illegal Immigration, admitted that delays getting the Rwanda bill approved in Parliament has meant accommodation for migrants in Rwanda is no longer available.
Then it's inevitable, I'm afraid, there are going to be challenges. It's inevitable that people are going to try and throw everything in this to try and stop this plan from working. I mean, frankly, we saw last night from the Labour Party and from the Labour Lords, they seem more determined to stop the flights. We're determined to stop the boats. There will be challenges, but we will meet them. We will overcome them. There are houses that are there. It's an uncapped scheme. Rwanda is a very welcoming country, and it is there. It is ready to take. It's already housing 135,000 migrants there already. It's an incredibly welcoming country.
Some of those houses have been sold off. Is that not right?
There are houses that are there. Already.
Have some of them been sold off?
There are houses that are there, that are in place,
have
ready
some been sold
for.
Off or not?
Of course, houses have been sold. That is right, but it's mixed housing. No. It's mixed housing. These aren't ghettos where people are going to be put in Rwanda. It's mixed housing. Part of the policy for Rwanda to welcome refugees. I think what we haven't heard enough
but the Poise Riverside Estate was set up for
is.
These people that were coming from the UK. It's been delayed so much that as a result, some of those houses have now been sold off to local people. Well, is that right or not?
That is right.
Okay.
It was always inevitably going to be that way because it was for mixed housing. It wasn't just for refugee housing, and that's a really important point.
Well, I also spoke to the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, about the passing of the controversial Rwanda bill, again, before the news of the deaths broke this morning. I asked her what changes, if any, would be made to the scheme under a Labour government.
We will replace it. What you can't do is just stick with the status quo. That is clearly not working. So the point is to replace the Rwanda scheme with the cross-border policing, the new returns and enforcement unit, so that you actually properly make the system work and properly strengthen border security.
But can you envisage a situation where at least some people in the interim will find themselves under a potential Labour government going to Rwanda?
We're not going to do the Rwanda scheme because every time you do, you have to write more checks. No, we're not going to do the Rwanda scheme.
So nobody will go?
So our plan is not to do the Rwanda scheme. Instead, it's to put the money into investing actually in our border security and preventing boats arriving in the first place. No, that's not our plan.
Mari is here with us. Hi, Mari. So that is what either side of the political spectrum is saying. This morning, as a result of what was announced yesterday, all of this before the news of yet more deaths.
Yes, exactly. Both those interviews with yourself were done before we had this breaking news about those deaths in the Channel. So those need to be taken in context. But nonetheless, we have seen this happen again and again, and this is why the government insists that the Rwanda bill is necessary and the only way to stop these kinds of deaths happening again and again and again. So the Rwanda bill will be made law this week. It's passed through Parliament. That's finally got through after quite a lot of what we call parliamentary ping-pong, which essentially goes between the House of Lords and House of Commons back and forth until they make a decision and come to an agreement. Now, we've heard from the Rwanda government this morning as well on their view. They are still very much pro the policy, eager to get going with it. So I'll read you just some of the statement from a Rwandan government spokesperson. They say, "We are pleased the bill has been passed by the UK Parliament. However, it doesn't after what we have always known to be true. We have worked hard over the last 30 years to make Rwanda a safe and secure country for Rwandans and non-Rwandans alike. This is why we are able to offer safety to over 130,000 refugees already in Rwanda, and why we partner with the UNHCR to bring migrants stuck in Libya to a safety in our country. We are committed to the Migration and Economic Development Partnership with the UK and look forward to welcoming those relocated to Rwanda." So Rwanda very much demonstrating they are still completely committed to the scheme, despite the wranglings that we've seen go on in Parliament. Government utterly focused on that. We've had a statement from Rishi Sunak overnight, clearly pleased that it's finally got through Parliament now. And then obviously we've had this devastating news this morning, which brings it all into perspective.
It's hard to fathom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. What about the people at the heart of this, those that have crossed in boats to the UK and are now seen as asylum seekers by some in Derby, illegal asylum seekers by others? Let's get more, should we? Becky Johnson has been speaking to some of them.
You are all welcome here in Derby, and it is important that your voices can be heard by the Home Office in London.
The welcome offered by this charity in Derby, in contrast with the government's intention to send people here to Rwanda. Several of these asylum seekers have been told they're being considered for removal. Hamza, who's from Iran, received this letter from the Home Office saying it may ask Rwanda whether it would admit him. "I'm very stressed," he tells me. "I don't know what to do. All I can think about is this letter and Rwanda." And for everyone still waiting to hear the outcome of their asylum claim, the concern is no news means bad news.
Rwanda is not a safe place.
Does it make you regret coming to the UK?
Yeah, if before I came here, you say that, they sent to me in Rwanda, I never come here.
Fatima says she doesn't regret leaving Afghanistan.
I fled my country in order to be safe, yeah? Otherwise, I'm gonna killed by Taliban.
How do you feel that you could now get sent to Rwanda?
It is not fair, especially for the one who came from Afghanistan.
Outside the meeting, Masood, who's from Iran, reveals an email confirming he too is being considered for Rwanda. Would you have come to the UK if you'd have known you could end up in Rwanda?
Never. Never.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum, don't come to UK.
His words could be seized on by the government as evidence the Rwanda plan will work as a deterrent. But the Prime Minister also needs it to work as a vote winner. And in Derby city centre, we found feelings are mixed. You support people being sent to Rwanda?
If not there, then somewhere.
I'm pretty sure it's going to cost a lot of money, so when that could be put into other places in the country.
People who are small-minded will just go, yeah, great, it gets rid of people, or things like that.
Whether it now happens this summer matters to the success of the policy and the people waiting to see if they'll be on a plane. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Derby.
As far as the Prime Minister is concerned, he's going to visit Warsaw today, where he's set to announce a record package of military funding for Ukraine, including the UK's largest ever delivery of vital equipment like vehicles and missiles. The Prime Minister is expected to announce £500 million of additional funding for a range of military support, including drones supplied by the UK. It means that overall, the UK will be spending £3 billion in military aid for Ukraine this financial year to help them defend against Russia's invasion. The Ministry of Defence will send more than 400 vehicles, the largest ever single package of equipment from the UK. It's also going to send more than 1,600 strike and air defence missiles, as well as additional Storm Shadow long-range precision-guided missiles. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, Deborah? A lot of support from the UK for Ukraine. Suggestions that it's still not going to be enough. They need more and more and more.
Yes, and also, why has it taken this long? You know, the Ukrainians have been crying out for as much support as possible over the last year. And you know, given that we clearly did have more stocks that we could give, there are people that I've spoken to who question why it's taken the Prime Minister this long to come up with this announcement. But obviously, it's going to be welcome news. And the fact that he's doing this during this tour, he's going to be in Poland, he's also meeting the German Chancellor, you know, maybe galvanising the European effort to keep supporting Ukraine. You've just had that news from the United States, finally, belatedly passing their huge military aid package. But the big question is whether it's going to arrive on time, because the Ukrainian military are right now in the firing line, and it's the Russians that have been very slowly advancing. And the hope that this new package of aid will change the course and enable the Ukrainians to then regain ground. That it hasn't happened in the past. It needs to be much more sustained, and it's not just about giving this aid. It's about ramping up our industrial capacity to keep providing weapons into the long term.
OK. For now, thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Rest of the day's top stories?
Yes, good morning. Remind you of some of the other stories this morning. The number of alcohol-related deaths in the UK has reached a record high, shooting up rapidly at the start of the pandemic. New figures show that in 2022, more than 10,000 people died as a direct result of drinking, which is around a third higher than compared with 2019. They were highest in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the northeast of England. More smokers are trying to curb the habit as a result of the cost of living crisis. A pack of cigarettes is expected to tip over £16 from October 2026 after tobacco duty was increased in the spring budget. Researchers from University College London found that of the more than 5,500 people they surveyed, each of them had made an attempt to quit over the past 12 months. The Metropolitan Police has agreed an independent force will review the handling of new evidence relating to the murder of Stephen Lawrence, 30 years on from his killing. Stephen was stabbed to death in a racist attack by a gang in South London. Only 2 of his killers have ever been brought to justice. The original investigation was criticised in the landmark Macpherson report in 1999, which found the Met to be institutionally racist. Borrowing figures for the last financial year have overshot forecasts, dealing a blow to the Chancellor. The Office for National Statistics figures revealed that borrowing hit £120.7 billion as wages and benefit payments soared. The ONS had estimated that full-year public sector net borrowing was £7.6 billion less than in 22 to 23, but £6.6 billion more than predicted by the UK's official forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility. Meanwhile, in the United States, Donald Trump faces the second day of his criminal trial later, one of the most high-profile cases in American history. The court's already heard that prosecutors accuse him of waging an illegal scheme to corrupt election results. James Matthews has more.
It is the rare sight, now routine, of a former president on a daily court run. Donald Trump snaked through the streets of Manhattan in the cavalcade that carves a new chapter in US legal and political history. This was a day for opening statements from prosecution and defence, and from the defendant by the door.
This is done as election interference. Everybody knows it. I'm here instead of being able to be in Pennsylvania and Georgia and lots of other places campaigning, and it's very unfair.
Donald Trump as a criminal defendant is a spectacle in itself.
The courtroom is incredibly dingy.
Author Michael Wolff was inside court.
It's very rare for someone like Donald Trump or for any celebrity to be in front of the public for so many hours. I mean, he is naked before us.
The prosecution case is that porn star Stormy Daniels was paid off to keep an affair with Trump quiet just before the 2016 election. Trump's lawyer made the payment, and when he was reimbursed, it was put through the books as something else. The prosecution says that was the falsification of business records that amounted to election interference. They told the jury this case is about criminal conspiracy. It was election fraud, pure and simple. Trump's defense attorney told them there's nothing wrong with trying to influence an election. It's called democracy. Opening statements saw Trump's defense unveiled as attack on the former lawyer Michael Cohen, who paid the porn star. They said he was obsessed with getting Trump. The first witness has now taken the stand. David Pecker, who used to publish the National Enquirer magazine. He helped to orchestrate a so-called catch and kill scheme to catch negative stories about Donald Trump and kill them before they reach the public arena. For Donald Trump, it is the evidence of friends and foes, and his future depends on it. James Matthews, Sky News in New York.
It seems our problems with potholes continues to deepen. New data showing pothole-related breakdowns in the UK up 9% in the last year. In the year to the end of March, the RAC says it was called out to over 27,000 breakdowns caused by crumbling roads, up more than 3,000 on the previous year.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you, a new strain of bacteria could help those suffering from IBS. We'll be speaking to a lead researcher and a woman who had stoma surgery. Speaking to two bereaved mums working towards peace amid the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas.
Target towns like Grimsby and Cleethorpes will help decide who wins the next election. But here, like in so many towns, some people are indifferent about polling day. Join me, Sophie Ridge, for a Politics Hub special, when we meet those who say they don't want to vote. What will change their minds? And yours.
The sewage problem is huge, but it's also a massive problem with plastic pollution as well. But yeah, the sewage problem in the UK is pretty horrific. I think the plastic problem is definitely getting worse. We're definitely noticing it more and more. I often hit plastic in the water when I'm windsurfing. You see quite a lot of it, from crisp packets to plastic bags to big plastic containers. And that's global. That's not just a UK problem, it's everywhere. When we're racing, you can hit stuff in the water and you stop instantly. So you go from 35 miles an hour to 0, and that causes injuries. It ends your race. You can lose world titles over it. I've had friends that have lost world titles off the back of hitting plastic in the water, and that's just not fair. In terms of the sewage pollution, I've had to go abroad for training. It's almost impossible. If you think about every day that it's windy in the UK, almost, it's raining, and that's when they can discharge sewage in the storm overflows. So for it to be safe to go in the water, it's so rare that we can have good enough conditions and for it to be safe. In the UK, we have a good monitoring system, so you can at least tell through the Surfers Against Sewage app whether it's possible to go in the water or safe to go in the water, but invariably, it's not ideal. The situation here is really, really terrible. I'm actually having a year off from competition.
Okay.
But I am coming back next year in a new discipline, and so I'm training for that. Can you tell me? Yeah, so I've been a racer for my whole life, and now I'm moving into waves. So racing is about going as fast as possible, 8 people on the race course at the same time, no rules, and the first person over the finish line wins. And now I'm moving more into wave sailing, where it's all about using the waves to surf and then using them as a ramp to jump off.
Hello again, everybody. New research has found a new strain of bacteria which could be the key to unlocking the secrets of IBS. Gut health and immunology expert Dr. Jenny Bailey, who has been at the forefront of this study, is with us now. Hi, good morning.
Hi,
Tell
good
me
morning.
more.
Thank you for inviting me on the show. So, IBS is a huge problem. So, irritable bowel syndrome affects about 1 in 5 people in the general population. That's 1 in 5 people who have to think about things that for the rest of us we don't even consider. And that can be things like going out for a meal and having to carefully scrutinise the menu choices to make sure that you eat something that isn't going to trigger your condition. And these are just the people that are diagnosed. Actually, up to 1/3 of people can experience IBS-like symptoms, but just put up with them. We see people sort of suffering in silence over this condition. They'll experience things like bloating, diarrhea, stomach cramps, but they just accept them and get on with them. And so what we're doing is looking at how we can help these people and let them know that there are solutions and they don't have to just put up with these symptoms.
So tell me about the new research.
The new research that we've done is looking at why don't some of the conventional probiotics work in people who have a stressed gut. We know that, again, stress is a huge problem in our society. 60% of people say they feel stressed on a weekly basis, and that can wreak havoc with our guts. I think if anybody has ever been for a job interview or done something that they feel a bit nervous about, then they'll have felt there's butterflies in their stomach. And that sort of highlights the link between our brain and our gut. And a stressed gut can be quite a hostile environment to some of the species that are conventionally used as probiotics. Things like lactobacilli and bifidobacteria. They're things that most people turn to when they're looking for a probiotic. Those bugs don't do well in a stressed gut or a gut that has an active flare-up of a condition. So at the times when people need them the most, they just can't work. So what we're doing is looking to find different probiotics that can survive in that environment.
But how do you do that?
So my background is in immunology. I'm really interested in the gut immune system and how bacteria within the gut can interact with that. And what we started off doing was, this has been done over 10 years research at the University of Bristol. We came up with a blueprint for what we'd want to see in a probiotic. What would we want it to do? How would we like it to behave? And then we set about screening hundreds of different strains to find something that ticked all of those boxes. And that's what we've done. We've found an isolate of Streptococcus thermophilus, which is a bacteria that's traditionally used in the food industry. It's used in most yogurt starter cultures. But we've got a rather unique strain that can survive and thrive in a stressed gut and can help to soothe down the troubles that people have within their gut.
So what happens next?
So we have a product on the market now, which we've put this bacteria into. It's a product called Ferrocom. What we're doing is we're really trying to open those conversations with people in the IBS community, find out what their problems are and how we can help with that. At the moment, we're conducting trials of this product. We've just completed our first trial. We're moving into the second phase of that now. And we're finding that this product is really helping people to reduce their IBS symptoms.
That's brilliant. Well, do keep in touch with us, won't you, and
Absolutely.
tell us as the screening progresses and the trials. Thank you very much, Dr. Bailey. Thank you. Let's bring in Lauren, should we? She's 27. She was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2018, underwent stoma surgery in 2021. Hi, Lauren. This potentially is very good news for you, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So I've got Crohn's disease, which is an immune condition of the gut. It's lifelong and currently has no cure. So the thought of something that could maybe help with the symptoms that I experience on a daily basis would massively help me.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's very debilitating for you, isn't it, your condition?
Yes, absolutely. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2018. I was only 21 years old. And then in 2021, I actually had a stoma fitted and I was only 25, which was an emergency situation and also a huge shock. It wasn't something that I was prepared for and obviously changed my life pretty much overnight, really.
But, you know, you're happy and you're smiling. What's your advice to others who find themselves in the same position as you?
Yeah, I am really happy. My advice to people in a similar situation would be to try your absolute best to embrace it, although that might be incredibly challenging at first. But remember that your body is something that has kept you alive all of this time, and it's time to thank your body for being able to do that. And if being alive and well means having to go to the toilet in a bag on the front of your stomach, then that's a gift worth celebrating and something that you can absolutely do, and you're strong enough to overcome that, really, is what I would say.
Well, good for you. Good for you. And thanks for telling us about your experience. You beautiful lady that you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Still to come on The Breakfast Show. Speaking to a military analyst, Colonel Simon Diggins, about what the UK's record military aid package will mean for Ukraine. Hello again, everybody. Just about to get the top stories, but just seeing that 10 people have died in Malaysia after 2 helicopters collided mid-flight. The country's Navy says the crash happened during a training session for its 90th anniversary celebrations. It says it'll establish an inquiry to look into the cause of the incident. 10 dead after 2 helicopters collided during a training session for the 90th anniversary of the Malaysian government.
More details of that on the Sky News app as well, I think.
Absolutely.
Let's remind you of our top stories this morning. French police say at least 5 people have died trying to cross the English Channel. The French Coast Guard confirmed a rescue operation found lifeless bodies after the failed attempt off the coast of Wimmera. It comes as Sky News captured these images of other migrants setting off this morning. Well, it comes on the morning after the government's Rwanda bill passed. For weeks, peers have been pushing back on the scheme, which seeks to deport asylum seekers arriving in the UK via small boats to Rwanda. It's from the House of Commons to Warsaw for the PM today, where he's expected to announce a record package of military funding for Ukraine, including the UK's largest ever delivery of vital equipment like vehicles and missiles. Donald Trump, the first US president to face criminal charges, will be in court again today in one of the most high-profile cases in American history. Prosecutors accuse him of waging an illegal scheme to corrupt election results. And the Met Police chief has defended how officers handled a campaigner against anti-Semitism at a pro-Palestinian demonstration, describing the actions as professional. Sir Mark Rowley admitted some of the words exchanged were clumsy, but confirmed the officers involved would not be sanctioned.
Let's talk about the Parents Circle Family Forum. It's a joint Israeli-Palestinian organisation made up of hundreds of bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families working together for peace. Let's speak now to two of the group. Joining us is Robbie Damelin. She is an Israeli peace activist, and also Leila Al-Sheikh, a Palestinian peace activist. Robbie, I'll come to you in just a second, if I may. Leila, if I may start with you. I've listened to the podcast where both of you ladies took part. Absolutely heartbreaking story. Leila, tell me what happened to your little boy.
11th of April 2002, he woke up that night after the Israeli soldiers came to our village and they threw tear gas, and because of that he became ill. And because we live in a village, so we tried to take him to a hospital inside Bethlehem, but the Israeli soldiers prevented us more than reached the hospital. It was to save his life. And at the end of that day, he died because of lack of treatment.
So he was only 6 months old, I think I'm right in saying, and you couldn't get to where you needed to go. You say because Israeli soldiers were stopping you on the border, and as a result, your little boy died. Robbie, your son was older, but still perished as a result of this conflict.
Yes, David was killed by a Palestinian sniper. I just want to say in the beginning that one Palestinian killed my son, not the whole Palestinian nation. And one of the first things that I said when the army came to tell me was, you cannot kill anybody in the name of my child.
You said that, didn't you, as the officials came to the door to tell you that your son had died. It was important to you, Robbie, to try to meet up with the person that had killed your son and or his family. What did you want to say to them?
It's not a question of wanting to say, it's wanting to understand why. It's the same, as soon as I had written the letter to the family of the sniper, and I heard that he had seen his uncle violently killed when he was a small child, and then lost two further uncles in the second uprising, I began to understand why. It's not condoning, it's understanding why. And really, that's the reason I wanted to meet him. It's not so important to me anymore today. I think I'm very much more at peace with myself. But the understanding why leads into understanding how October the 7th happened. How did that happen? How could a young boy who grew up in Gaza, who for all his life, every 2 years, probably a war, he had no shelter to run to, he had no hope, he had no freedom of movement. So what kind of adult would he become? And then you look at the kids on the kibbutzim on the 7th of October. Before that, they thought they were invincible. But now they recognized that they were not, and that was tragic. And also, if you look at the towns surrounding Gaza, that is Ashdod, Ashkelon, Sderot, these kids have been faced with bombarding with rockets since they were small children. So now, what kind of adults are they going to be? And so understanding how is not condoning, but maybe it's a way to begin change. And if we don't change the circumstances, we will not kill an idea.
Layla, when your son died at just a few months old, you said that you were filled with hatred and anger against Israelis, that you didn't want to have children for several years because of what had happened to Kasai. What has happened subsequently for you to want to be a member of the Parent Circle Family Forum and to move towards a two-state solution and peace in your region?
First of all, one of the things that I think about when I lost him, that I didn't want to take revenge because revenge will never bring him back to me. But I was really filled with hatred and anger because that was something I can't imagine, like what happened. But many or 16 years later, I met one of my friends who spoke about the parent circle, and then I met him. Sorry, I met them in Bethlehem. There were a conference for the parent circle, and that was the first time I listened to their stories and how they lost their beloved ones. And I was really touched and moved because that was the first time I listened to their stories. And for the first time, I felt that we share the same tears, even if we had different circumstances, but we're still human. And nothing worse than losing a child or a family member. So from that day, I decided to be a member in the forum to understand what's going on, to understand much more about the Israeli, because as a Palestinian, I just met settlers or soldiers, but to meet people like Robbie, I didn't have a chance. So because of that, I participate in one of the projects called Parallel Narrative Project, which gives chance for both sides to sit, to listen, to share, and to learn about each other.
Robbie, before I let you go, what message do you want our viewers to take away this morning from our conversation in order to try to move away from the tragedy on both sides and towards peace?
Firstly, it's the realization of shared pain. There's no difference between the pain of Laila or me. Secondly, to stop importing our conflict into your country and creating hatred between Jews and Muslims. I've watched that happening all over the world. Since the war, I've been to America twice, to London, to Italy, and to Germany. And it's all the same polarization and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And I would invite all of the people who are watching to join us at a joint ceremony on the 12th of May. This is Memorial Day for soldiers, but we have a different kind of ceremony where both sides would tell their stories. It's online, and this year it's dedicated to the children in war.
Okay. We've made a note of that date, and we'll follow up with that after then.
We have
but ladies,
okay. You know, like just to listen to a child sending a letter to a child in Gaza is very moving.
I can't even begin to imagine, ladies. It's not the natural order for a child to die before you. I appreciate you having the strength to come and talk to us on the programme about it this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Home Secretary has retweeted our story about what's happening off the coast of France. 5 migrants having reportedly died there. He says these tragedies have to stop. I will not accept a status quo which costs so many lives. This government is doing everything we can to end this trade, stop the boats, and ultimately break the business model of the evil people smuggling gangs so they no longer put lives at risk. At least 5 people have died after an incident off the coast of France this morning involving several people trying to cross the channel on a small boat. Continuing coverage on Sky.
The sewage problem is huge, but it's also a massive problem with plastic pollution as well. But yeah, the sewage problem in the UK is pretty horrific. I think the plastic problem is definitely getting worse. We're definitely noticing it more and more. I often hit plastic in the water when I'm windsurfing. You see quite a lot of it, from crisp packets to plastic bags to big plastic containers. And that's global. That's not just a UK problem, it's everywhere. When we're racing, you can hit stuff in the water and you stop instantly. So you go from 35 miles an hour to 0, and that causes injuries, it ends your race, you can lose world titles over it. I've had friends that have lost world titles off the back of hitting plastic in the water, and that's just not fair. In terms of the sewage pollution, I've had to go abroad for training. It's almost impossible. If you think about every day that it's windy in the UK, almost, it's raining, and that's when they can discharge sewage in the storm overflows. So for it to be safe to go in the water, it's so rare that we can have good enough conditions and for it to be safe. In the UK, we have a good monitoring system, so you can at least tell through the Surfers Against Sewage app whether it's possible to go in the water or safe to go in the water. But invariably, it's not ideal. The situation here is really, really terrible. I'm actually having a year off from competition.
OK.
But I am coming back next year in a new discipline, and so I'm training for that.
Can you tell me?
Yeah, so I've been a racer for my whole life, and now I'm moving into waves. So racing is about going as fast as possible, 8 people on the race course at the same time, no rules, and the first person over the finish line wins. And now I'm moving more into wave sailing, where it's all about using the waves to surf and then using them as a ramp to jump off.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Let's bring in Colonel Simon Diggins to talk about the situation in Ukraine. A military package, £500 million, is what the Prime Minister has promised. That's a shed load. How much have we got left in the locker?
I think that's one of the issues, because it's not just the £500 million, but we're also sending over a significant amount of equipment as well, which, as we understand it, is going to come out of the MOD's own resources, so the MOD's budget. We're talking about armoured vehicles, talking about 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition. It's a whole lot there. So it does actually bring back to this major issue we've got in this country about, do we have the ability to generate our own defences, our own defence equipment, and support other people as well? So, yeah, that's a big issue.
OK, so what are we doing to refill that?
Well, that's one of the issues around the financing. I mean, the moment this government is still arguing about whether or not it can increase its defence budget to 2.5% of GDP.
What is it now, 2.4?
2.2, 2.3, depends how you measure it. Labour has pledged to get it to 2.5%, but the opposition, which in this case is Russia, currently spending 7.5% of its GDP on its military, about 1/3 of all its government expenditure. So it's absolutely vital what we're doing, supporting Ukraine and doing everything to go there. But we then look very, very hard at our own defence and our own defence capabilities.
How much trouble are we in?
I would say we're in real trouble. I mean, and you've got to look at people like the prime ministers of Estonia, the Latvian state, Lithuania and Poland, all of whom have warned that Russia would be capable of striking NATO within 3 to 5 years. So Russia is able at the moment to fight in Ukraine and rebuild its armed forces, reorganise it as it goes, and then what happens in 1 to 2 years' time when the Ukraine situation, I suspect, is going to be stabilised rather than they're going to be absolutely finished. It's then in a position to completely reorganise armed forces, if you like, all dressed up and no place to go. And that's the issue. So it's not about a question of waiting 10 years. We've got a problem in the next 3 to 5 years.
I was reading that Russia is already on, its economy is on a war footing, which means that they're spending a significant percentage of their GDP on armoury.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the figures that we're hearing about. So, I think a couple of months ago we estimated it to be 6%. I saw an estimate the other day from RUSI, nearly 8.5%. And this is a massive amount of money. We haven't spent anything like that since 1950. Really the height of the Cold War. So they have basically reorganised their economy on a war footing. In terms of the issue of effective sanctions on them, they've found their own suppliers. They've established strategic relationships with China, with Iran and various other countries, North Korea, all of whom provide them with strategic materials to support themselves. They don't need the rest of the world. So they can actually focus their resources actually on what they're doing, which is rebuilding their armed forces. And that's the real problem.
OK. What would military men like you like to see as a percentage from this British government pledging from our GDP going forward?
I think we need to look at a minimum of 3%. And actually, it should almost be based not just on a figure, because that's easy to hit or not to hit, because it can be manipulated. It's what do we actually need? What do we need to deploy to actually defend ourselves? Could we, for example, very straightforwardly, provide the sort of air defence that even Ukraine's able to do in Kyiv at the moment? And the question is probably, the answer is not easily. We don't have that air defence. We don't have anything like it. We don't have anything like what Israel's had in terms of air defence. And then we have to have people who are deployed forward who can actually defend against any Russian aggression. So we are in a very difficult place at the moment. So if we talked about 3%, people can imagine it. But actually, even being fixed to a particular figure like 3%, it may not be the answer. What we need to do is actually, what do we actually need to defend this country and to protect our allies? And that's the figure we need to do. It's a hard call, because I recognise as a military man, but who's been out in the army for a few years, that every penny we spend on defence can be spent on something else. And goodness knows there are many things we could do with the money being spent on in this country. But I think we're in that place now where a government is going to have to really bite the bullet and say, this is the challenge for our next 5 years.
Is that what he's going to do in Poland this afternoon? We'll have to wait and see, but I know you'll come back and talk to us again.
I look forward to it.
Good to see you, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Let's look at the latest images that are reaching us here at Sky Centre. This is a small boat that was heading from the coast of France across to the UK. This morning we're hearing that at least 5 people have perished after the small boat they were in, trying to cross the channel, got into difficulties. Alice is in Dover, off the coast of Dover for us. Hello to you, Alice. You've seen the evidence of small boats that have managed to make the journey this morning.
Yes, that's right. We're about 20 miles from Wimereux, which is where, unfortunately, these migrants left France to try and make their way to the UK. And it was unfortunately, clearly, they got into difficulties quite early on, and 5 people have been confirmed dead. And it was quite interesting because where we are here, I can see France right in front of me. I'm right on the Dover Strait, which is the most narrow point between England and France, and Dover behind me. But about 45 minutes ago, we saw one of Border Force's vessels, that's called the Volunteer, and it suddenly went past us incredibly quickly, going about 28 miles per hour to try and, we presume, get to the area where, unfortunately, this boat that was carrying about 110 people, which normally it's a small vessels overladen with people, and often difficultly sort of conditions as they try and make their way over. And so Border Force have been trying to make their way there, but we've also seen from the boat we're on at the moment, they've got their own radars, and they've been able to see that the French Coast Guard, the French Navy are all making their way there to try and work out exactly what happened and investigate how those 5 people unfortunately died after setting sail at about 5 o'clock this morning.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Mari, we've not heard from the Prime Minister as yet. We have heard from the Home Secretary basically underlining the fact that they are doing the right thing to try to stop these boats crossing the channel by passing this law.
Yeah, exactly. So what we anticipated really from the government in terms of the message. Home Secretary James Cleverly has tweeted this morning saying these tragedies have to stop. I will not accept a status quo which costs so many lives. This government is doing everything we can to end this trade, stop the boats and ultimately break the business model of the evil people smuggling gangs so they no longer put lives at risk. Now, we're still waiting to hear from Labour on this, but we have also had a comment from from the Scottish National Party, the SNP, Home Affairs spokesperson as well, saying the latest deaths in the Channel are utterly tragic. Their thoughts are with all those who've lost loved ones so close to safety. It goes on to say, if safe and legal routes such as family reunification and humanitarian visas were functioning and available for people, no one would need to set foot on a leaky rubber dinghy. So a bit of a warning shot there from the SNP as well in terms of criticising the Rwanda bill and government policy.
Absolutely. Adam Parsons actually at the scene for us. He'll be joining us throughout the day here on Sky News. 5 dead the very next day after this law's passed.
Yeah, and this law's passed, a hugely tragic situation, but this is a situation that's gone on for years. You think of the dinghies, people were desperately trying to get on the Channel Tunnel trains and being electrocuted or crushed wherever. This has been a site of decades of tragedy, which the UK government, the French government has struggled to solve. And they've done so maybe with fences and CCTV, but they don't talk in the same breath about international development, for example, and supporting nation-states to try and support communities back at home.
Yeah. As I said, Adam Parsons is at the scene for us. He was on the coast of France, northern coast of France, this morning when the news came through that 5 people at least have died as a result of a tragedy in the sea, people trying to cross in a small boat. More on that in just a moment.
This is Sky News Today with Wilfred Frost. It's 10 o'clock. Your headlines. At least 5 people have died trying to cross the channel just hours after Parliament passes the Rwanda bill aimed at deterring small boat crossings. We hear from asylum seekers in Derby who say they would never have come to the UK knowing they might be deported to Rwanda.
Do you think it will stop other people coming now?
Yeah. I say to all asylum not coming to UK.
Also ahead, the Prime Minister set to announce the largest ever military aid package for Ukraine during a visit to neighbouring Poland. The Post Office inquiry hears from the former company secretary who's expected to be quizzed on how much bosses knew. And Donald Trump's fraud trial prepares to hear from the tabloid magazine publisher about efforts to suppress damaging stories. A very good morning to you. At least 5 people have died trying to cross the channel just hours after Parliament passed legislation aimed at deterring small boat crossings. French media say a child is among those who've died, while authorities in northern France say 1 person has survived. Well, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons is in Wimereux on the French coast for us live this morning. And Adam, this devastating news crossing a couple of hours ago, of course, just a couple of hours after the Rwanda bill passed.
Rwanda bill was going through Parliament. There were clearly a very large group of people who were preparing to get on a boat and try to get from here in Wimereux in northern France over to the British shore. Now, what we know from the French Coast Guard is that the boat was hugely overcrowded. They say that there were 110 people on this boat. That seems an absolutely incredibly high number, even by the standards of these overladen boats. But that it set off from here in Wimereux, didn't, it would appear, get too far out, hit a sandbank. Now, this area is notorious for sandbanks. The locals know how to navigate them. Amateurs simply wouldn't know. And at that point, it would seem, is that people stood up. There was something of a panic. People fell into the water. And at that point, there were fatalities. Now, as you said, what we know is that at least 5 people have died. At least 1 person is seriously unwell and is in hospital. A lot of people did get treatment and they were brought here. Now, the other notable thing I'd say about being in Wimereux right now is that, frankly, you wouldn't know that this horrendous tragedy has just happened. The sun is out. There are people walking up and down to windsurfing competition about to start. If we give you just a few little tips there. If you look over there in the corner, that silver foil, that collection of clothes, those clearly taken from people who were brought off this stricken boat or brought from the water. That tent with the purple surround from it is where the bodies were laid as they were recovered from the water. When we first arrived here, there were emergency vehicles around. They've now gone. There are no emergency vehicles left in this area. And there are people walking up and down here as if nothing happened. And yet, of course, something really did. At least 5 people are dead. And this is the second time in 4 months that I've been here reporting on 5 migrants dying in an accident along these waters. Back in January, a little bit further along the coast, they were dying of hypothermia after a similar incident. And this, of course, takes the toll now into double figures for the numbers who have died in the Channel over the course of this year. The question will be whether or not the Rwanda bill actually changes any of this. Will it be a deterrent to stop people coming across on these small boats? And that, I think, is an important question. This morning we were a bit further down the coast and we saw a number of dinghies coming out from near Dunkirk and trying to get across to Britain. A couple of them turned back. One of them was certainly on its way to Britain. We spoke to a French police officer about the Rwanda bill. He said that he didn't think it would change anything. And according to people that I've spoken to, and as you can see, I was saying about how you can imagine nothing's happened. Already, that paraphernalia that you saw just a minute ago is being packed away. I think the brutal truth is that this area of France has become, if not inured, then wearily accustomed to these sort of deaths. A lot of people here are angry that they see that Britain doesn't do enough to dissuade people from coming across. they don't often think that the Rwanda bill is necessarily the answer. They think it's too easy for people to disappear into the grey market in Britain, which, of course, here you have to have an identity card. In Britain, you don't. So there is resentment here about that kind of pull factor going to Britain. Rishi Sunak, who's put so much political capital into what he says stopping the boat, he will look at this Rwanda bill. I'm sure later today he will say that this is exactly the sort of tragedy he is intending to stop. James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, has already reiterated exactly those words. But I suppose for the moment, this isn't really about politics. This is about the very human fact that 5 people, at least 5 people, have died, and others are in hospital just down the road after this latest grim chapter in the history of migrant crossings of the Channel.
Adam, it's fascinating to hear you say that there's resentment there in northern France that the UK's not doing more to pull the migrants across, to offer them something. I'm interested, before we got news of this tragedy 90 minutes or so ago, in your early hits on The Breakfast Show with Kay, talking about the boats that were leaving, and it didn't seem like there was anything at all being done to stop them leaving. I guess on a day where we thought we'd be talking about what the UK's trying to do to deter these crossings, what is your take on the extent to which the French authorities are trying to deter the departures in the first place?
The French throw a lot of resource, partly because it's funded by the British now, at the beaches. So I've been on many of those beaches in the middle of the night, and often, frankly, been stopped by French police who've asked me who I am, what I'm doing there. Am I a people smuggler, to all intents and purposes? The problem, Wilfred, is that this is a vast coast. It goes in and out. It's very, very hard to police. You need, goodness knows how large an army of officers to do this every night. What they operate on is a combination of trying to be in the right place at the right time, having a bit of luck and intelligence. So they will mark the pathways into beaches. You see officers up in dunes. You see Coast Guard boats going along here. But crucially, their standing orders are effectively that once a boat gets into the water, that then they don't get involved. And some, I think, to some observers, it looks curious because they will chase migrants down the beach. They will try and slash the boat to stop it being deployed. But once that boat is in the water, once the migrants have effectively got their feet wet, then they will stand off. And I've seen that as well. I've seen lines of officers standing on a beach watching as a boat goes. Same, can't see one at the moment, but earlier we've seen Coast Guard ships out here. They will go alongside a migrant boat as it heads to Britain. They will offer, they will say, you need help, we can help you. But following French law, following maritime law, if those people on board say, actually, we don't need help, they say there is nothing they can do. But they are adamant that they are doing everything in their power to stop people leaving in the first place.
Adam Parsons, thanks so much for us in Wimereux, northern France. By the way, on this topic, very much on this topic, and specifically what Adam was just saying, Robert Jenrick, of course, the former Home Office minister who resigned when he felt that the Rwanda bill wasn't tough enough, has just tweeted. He said, "This is another intolerable tragedy. It's a scandal these death traps masquerading as boats are travelling uninterrupted across the EU. EU must finally grant member states legal cover to seize these unseaworthy boats that are costing precious lives." That was Robert Jenrick's tweet in the last few moments. Let's now go to our correspondent Alice Porter, who's on a boat off the coast of Dover. And Alice, I mean, Adam talking there about the vast size of the northern coastline of France, not as vast as the Channel where we find you now. What sort of operations have you witnessed today?
Yeah, that's right. I'm about 20 miles from where Adam is at the moment in Wimereux, and I'm actually at what's called the Dover Strait, and this is the most narrow point between, I've got France in front of me and Dover behind me, and this, because it's the most narrow point, this tends to be one of the most popular areas for people who are trying to make their way from France to the UK, but it also makes it particularly dangerous because this is the biggest shipping route, the busiest shipping route in the entire world, and this particular particular lane is particularly busy on top of that. And around me at the moment, I can see kind of within my eye line about 20 different ships. It makes it very dangerous for anyone who's trying to make their way over. Now, the conditions today are in many ways ideal for someone trying to make that journey, and therefore it's perhaps no surprise that we've had that tragedy today. And I think as the year goes on, we are expecting, unfortunately, that number could well rise of people trying to do those journeys, because as the weather gets warmer, it makes it perhaps more appealing for people to do that. But of course, that's something that Rishi Sunak is certainly not going to be wanting. We're hearing from government ministers today that they're very much, James Cleverly as well, tweeting out about that, very much using this tragedy of 5 people who have confirmed to have died, who were trying to cross the English Channel this morning, saying that that's exactly what their legislation is about, and that they're trying to stop people trafficking vulnerable people across on this very, very dangerous journey. And it's also worth saying we've seen Border Force operating here. About 45 minutes ago, they passed in front of us, obviously trying to get close to Wimereux to see what happened. And we've certainly been aware in the Dover area of the lengths that Border Force are going to try and patrol and police the areas. For example, on the boat that we're on at the moment, every hour we're hearing on the radio asking people of all different vessels to be on the lookout, looking out for dinghies. And we have had a source close to Sky saying that, who's on a cliff top over Dover, saying that they have in fact spotted some dinghies in the water at the moment. As I say, Dover is a very popular place for people to try and make that very dangerous journey across. And unfortunately, that number that we've heard today of 5 people who have unfortunately died trying to cross, unfortunately, if people keep continuing to try to do those journeys, that number could well rise.
Porter, thanks for joining us live in the middle of the English Channel there. Well, the government's controversial Rwanda bill, of course, as we've been discussing, finally passed its parliamentary hurdles after midnight last night.
The question is that motion A be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content. The contents have it.
Well, despite facing fierce criticism, the Lords dropped their objections and allowed the bill to pass late last night. This morning, the Minister for Illegal Migration, Michael Tomlinson, told Sky News that despite the law passing, legal challenges are still expected, while the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, described the policy as a waste of money.
It's inevitable, I'm afraid, there are going to be challenges. It's inevitable that people are going to try and throw everything in this at this to try and stop this plan from working. I mean, frankly, we saw last night from the Labour Party and from the Labour Lords, they seem more determined to stop the flights. We're determined to stop the boats. There will be challenges, but we will meet them, we will overcome them.
The problem is that all they're doing each time is they're just writing more and more checks. So at every stage, you know, even in order to set up flights, even in order to send 300 people, they'll have to write another £120 million check. So at every stage, even for this small scheme that's just 1% of asylum seekers arriving, that will still cost hundreds of millions of pounds more.
The problem the bill is trying to tackle is, of course, to stop the boats, one of the Prime Minister's key policy pledges. Well, the number of people crossing the Channel in small boats had been rising before the scheme was announced in April 2022, and in that year, a record 45,755 people made the journey. The numbers did come down in 2023, but despite the threat of people being sent to Rwanda, they're now rising again. By the end of March this year, more than 5,000 have made the journey, a record for the first 3 months of the year. The government has not said what the total cost of the scheme would be, but an investigation by the public spending watchdog found the total bill could be more than £500 million, plus hundreds of thousands more for each deportee. It seems the public is yet to be convinced it will work. A YouGov poll from January found that while only 8% of people believe the scheme will be very effective and 20% think it'll be fairly effective at stopping migrants from crossing the Channel, more than half of those surveyed think it will be either not very effective or not effective at all. That was from January. Well, joining us now is Sky's political correspondent Mari Arora. Mari, lots to discuss this morning. In terms of what we learnt on Breakfast Show, I thought what was most standout was Yvette Cooper saying, again explicitly, what I guess we expected was Labour policy, that they would replace the Rwanda scheme, I guess, it does very clearly create a wedge between the two main parties, at least on the policy, while we wait to see whether it is ultimately effective.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Labour really want to put themselves apart from the Tories when it comes to immigration and their plans for immigration. So, as you explained, Wilf, the Rwanda scheme is very much seen as a Tory scheme. The Labour Party don't want to be associated with it. They want everyone to know that they would scrap it were they to be elected. They believe it's unworkable, unrealistic and a waste of money. And therefore, that is their attack line. It's interesting, the Labour Party trying to discredit the Rwanda plan, but also we are still waiting to hear a little bit more specifics from the Labour Party around exactly what we can expect were they to be in government, such as the kind of numbers we might expect in terms of targets when it comes to illegal migration as well as legal migration as well. And they don't really want to be drawn on that yet. So there is still some, I think, meat left to be fleshed out on some of the policy bones from the Labour side of things. But the Conservative Party very much branding last night a success, saying finally the bill is through, blaming Labour lords for blocking it in the first place. But it's important to remember the two kind of key bones of contentions, which is one of the many reasons why we had that parliamentary ping-pong, that back and forth between the Lords and the Commons, and back and forth, was two areas really. One was that a lot of Labour Lords felt it was more appropriate for an independent body to say that Rwanda is a safe country rather than just Parliament saying so because they believe so. And the second bone of contention was around Afghan veterans and essentially Afghan, for instance, interpreters who'd worked alongside with the British Armed Forces and then were potentially being hunted by the Taliban. Now, the government did not concede on that first bone of contention around the safety of Rwanda and who can decide that, but they did actually make a concession on the second point around Afghans who'd worked alongside British Armed Forces, saying that they were not going to let them down, and anyone who had legitimately essentially served alongside British Armed Forces would not be sent to Rwanda, even in an interim, while they were waiting for an asylum decision. And we had Michael Tomlinson confirm that on the programme this morning as well. So the government really sticking to their guns on this. And, we've seen from James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, this morning reacting to that tragic news of the number of deaths in the Channel that we're hearing about. And he really alludes to the Rwanda policy in his response. So he's tweeted this morning saying, "These tragedies have to stop. I will not accept a status quo which costs so many lives. The government is doing everything we can to end this trade, stop the boats, and ultimately break the business model of the evil people smuggling gangs so they can no longer put lives at risk." That is what we're hearing from the government. So you can see he doesn't use the word Rwanda, but realistically he is alluding to the Rwanda policy, saying that that is exactly why the government needs to bring this policy in, so that they prevent more needless deaths like the ones that we're seeing reported this morning, Wilf.
Mari, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Now, of course, the Prime Minister's been tweeting about that policy as well throughout the morning. But in fact, he is now focused on a different factor and is in Poland to meet President Tusk. And he has just had a call with the President of Ukraine, President Zelensky. Let's read out the Downing Street spokesperson statement. The Prime Minister spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky this morning to assure him the UK's steadfast support for Ukraine's defence against Russia's brutal and expansionist ambitions. He confirmed that the UK would provide an additional £500 million in immediate funding to support the highest priority capabilities, including further ammunition, air defence and drones, taking our support this year to £3 billion. The Ministry of Defence would also make our largest ever single commitment of military equipment to help Ukraine fight back across land, sea and air, including 60 boats, more than 400 vehicles and over 1,600 missiles. President Zelensky thanked the Prime Minister for the UK's continued support. And ahead of a visit to Poland and Germany, the Prime Minister reiterated Ukraine's security was central to all of Europe's security. Let's bring in our Security and Defence Editor, Deborah Haynes, who's able to join me now. Of course, we knew a little bit about this, Deborah, but confirmation that this has been delivered to President Zelensky, the message directly by the Prime Minister on a phone call just recently. Talk us through the significance to Ukraine of this extra £500,000 commitment, £500 million commitment, excuse me, of course, relative to what they got over the weekend from the US?
Well, it's tiny, isn't it, compared to the $61 billion that the US has announced. But obviously, every penny counts. But a source I've spoken to said, asked the question, why has it taken this long for the UK to come up with this next announcement of aid? Of course, it's going to be hugely welcome. Ukraine is fighting a war of survival. It's been saying very loudly and very clearly it needs more weapons. And so why the UK has taken a bit of time to come up and dig into, it looks like, into the store cupboards of the army, pulling out every last bit of ammunition, vehicles and other pieces of equipment to give to Ukraine. That's something that maybe the Prime Minister can explain. But in terms of the difference that it will make, it will make the difference when the actual equipment arrives there, so we don't know when that will be. And of course, the money, Ukraine needs money to be able to buy more of the ammunition that it desperately needs. There also needs, as well, to be a much longer-term effort to ramp up significantly the industrial capacity for the UK and for other European countries to be able to continue to supply Ukraine with weapons. It's great that the UK and others are digging into their own stockpiles in order to help the Ukrainian military, but it's about sustaining that war effort into the long term when you're up against Russia, which has put its economy onto a war footing and significantly cranked up its ability to produce weapons, which are what counts on the ground. It's about the numbers. Of course, technology is important too, and the Western allies have the edge when it comes to the technology that they're providing to Ukraine, but mass matters as well, and that is the number of soldiers, and Russia seems to be able to keep on throwing more people onto the front line, and of course weapons and ammunition, and that's where the West, including the UK, is falling short despite the announcement today.
Deborah Haynes, thanks so much, much appreciated. Now, former Post Office Company Secretary and General Counsel of the Post Office, Susan Crichton, is giving evidence this morning as the inquiry